Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. They say some houses breathe, and if you listen closely enough, in the right kind of silence, you'll hear the walls inhale your fears and exhale something darker. That's what the children of Ridgeway Hill believed, anyway. A place where the fog doesn't drift, it lingers like it's watching. And at the very top of the hill, hidden by curling branches and rotten fences, sat the Whitmore house. Abandoned for nearly 30 years, sealed off by the town council, whispered about in liquor-soaked pub corners, yet not forgotten, because 13 people went missing in that house. 13. Over 5 decades. No remains, no signs of struggle. They simply stepped in and never came out. It started again the night the lights came on. Cody Trenner was the first to see them. A 17-year-old with a knack for getting in trouble, and a motorcycle that roared through the dark like a metal scream. He swore he wasn't drunk that night, though no one in town believed him. Said he was riding past the south end of Ridgeway when he saw the faint glow in the attic. A single light bulb, swaying, flickering like it was trying to send a message. And maybe it was. Because that same night, Cody's bike was found outside the house, its front tire still spinning. But Cody, gone, like the 13 before him. The police sealed it off again, doubled the perimeter, forbade entry. But you know how kids are. 4 of them decided to test the myth: Kara, Malik, Jonah, and Sierra. High school seniors. 1 foot out of their sleepy town, eager for a thrill, for proof, for a story to tell before they scattered to different colleges and cities. Kara dared them. Malik brought the bolt cutters. Sierra laughed through her nerves. And Jonah, well, he filmed everything. That was his thing, recording what he called the raw and the rotten. He always said the world had more to show if you just knew where to point the camera. He would never get the chance to finish that documentary. It was 11:43 p.m. when they slipped through the hole in the fence. Kara kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see someone from town watching. But there was only the wind, whipping through trees like something angry trying to speak. The front porch groaned as they stepped on it, and the door, despite being locked for decades, opened with a push. Not forced, not broken. It opened like it had been waiting. The inside was, too, intact. The dust was there, sure, webs in the corners. But the furniture was upright, the wallpaper, faded yellow stripes, barely peeled. A portrait still hung on the wall. A man and woman, their eyes far too vivid for a photo that old. Kara stood staring at them while the others explored. "They're not watching us," she whispered, not fully aware she'd said it aloud. "They're looking at something behind us." Jonah caught that on tape. That quiet, breathy line. Later, when the footage was reviewed. And yes, there was footage. It was the moment everything shifted. They split up to explore. Classic mistake. Jonah stayed on the first floor, narrating his surroundings, shining his flashlight on every odd crack, every crooked fixture. Sierra followed Kara to the second floor, while Malik wandered to the basement. Despite everyone agreeing earlier not to go down there. It was in the hallway upstairs where Kara found the first door. Not a bedroom. Not a closet. A narrow wooden door with no handle, just a keyhole that looked deep enough to swallow light. "This wasn't on the floor plan," she muttered. Sierra, who'd pulled up the house's blueprints weeks before the dare, agreed. "It shouldn't be here." But Kara touched it anyway, placed her palm against the old wood, and it pulsed. Not like a vibration, not like creaking wood. It pulsed, like a slow heartbeat. Sierra pulled her hand away, eyes wide, shaking her head. "We shouldn't be here, Kara. This place, it's not empty." Kara laughed it off, but her laugh was hollow, too loud. She kept looking at the keyhole. Meanwhile, downstairs, Malik was breathing heavy. The camera on his phone caught the moment he stepped into the basement. The light above his head shorted with a pop, and his screen went black. He turned, went back up, but the stairs had changed. It was no longer a straight shot back to the hallway. They twisted now, turned sharply, looping like they were coiling around something. He swore under his breath and tried again, only to hear a sound that froze the air around him. A voice, distant, coming from behind a cement wall. A voice that sounded like his mother's. Only, she'd died 2 years ago. Upstairs, Jonah's camera caught movement in the mirror near the hallway. A child, maybe 5, barefoot, staring back at him with eyes black as ink. But when he turned, no one was there. Only the mirror remained, cracked now, spiderweb lines snaking outward like something had struck it from the inside. And Kara, she'd found the key. It was in a drawer beside the bed in the master bedroom, wrapped in what looked like hair, blonde strands tied in a perfect bow. Jonah's footage went wild then, static, sharp bursts of white and red, audio screeching like metal on bone. But a single frame survived. One image. The door was open. And Kara wasn't alone. There was something behind her. Tall, no face. Just skin, pale and stretched. Like someone had pulled it tight over a skull that wasn't shaped right. It loomed behind her, inches away, arms hanging like wet ropes, head tilted. The next scream came from Sierra, a scream that didn't stop. It just cut off, not faded, not ran out of air. 1 second it filled the hall, and the next silence. Jonah dropped the camera. What came after was chaos. Shaky shots of floors that didn't match the layout. Hallways that looped back into themselves. A door that led to a closet full of televisions, all playing static. One of them, according to later reports, showed a live feed of Malik in the basement, curled in the corner, rocking back and forth as something whispered from the darkness. No one could figure out how the feed existed. The camera had never been hooked to anything. Jonah tried to leave. He made it to the porch, saw the trees again, the night, the stars. But when he stepped outside, he was in the attic. His scream echoed, and somewhere, far below, the basement door slammed shut. The footage ends with a low hum, a vibration that gets louder over the next minute, until it's all you can hear. Then nothing. Black screen. That was 2 weeks ago. The footage was found on Jonah's camera, left neatly on the steps of the sheriff's office. No fingerprints, no blood, no sign of anyone else, just the footage. But there's one more thing. Every night since, at exactly 11:43 p.m., the light in the attic turns on. Flickers. Waits. The house on Ridgeway Hill is no longer abandoned, and it's hungry. What no one knows is what Kara saw through that door. Not fully, but there's a page torn from her journal that turned up in the woods near the back of the property. Mud, soaked. Hard to read. But this part was legible. It's not a place. It's a mouth. And we're already in its throat. The town says it's cursed. Some say it's haunted. But the truth is worse. That house remembers. And it's opening the door again. It started with the sound again. The low, rhythmic creaking that echoed like footsteps on rotten wood, even when no one was near the house. 3 days had passed since the footage surfaced. Jonah's camera had become a symbol of obsession, locked behind a glass case in the sheriff's office, like a cursed artifact. But even glass wasn't enough to hold back what came with it. The town of Elmridge had always been quiet. A place where Sundays bled into Mondays, where the most exciting thing was the yearly pie contest or the high school football team's losing streak. But after the footage was played for the town council in a closed session, a shadow passed over every conversation. People lowered their voices, crossed themselves at odd moments. More than a few folks packed up and left without saying goodbye. The mayor said it was nonsense, of course. Blamed it on editing tricks. Said the kids had likely run away. Staged the whole thing for some twisted prank. But no one believed that, not even her. Especially not when Deputy Rowan started screaming in the middle of the night, a scream so sharp it shattered the glass in his porch light. He was found on his front lawn, bleeding from his eyes, nails torn from clawing his own face. He kept repeating one sentence over and over until his voice gave out. There was no attic. At first, people assumed trauma. After all, Rowan had been the first to review the raw footage in full, frame by frame. But that theory crumbled when his wife found the attic door nailed shut inside their own house the next morning. An attic they never knew existed. One that hadn't been there when they moved in, when the inspector came, when they painted the ceiling just last year. It wasn't just in the Trenner household. Over the next 48 hours, 8 homes, each within a mile radius of Ridgeway Hill, developed a similar anomaly. A door in a wall where no door should be, sometimes nailed shut, sometimes open just a crack, but always, with a cold draft leaking out and the scent of something rotted on the other side. And then came the staircase. It was Nora Bell who saw it first. A single mother, mid-30s, working 2 jobs to keep the lights on for her daughter, Ellie. They lived in a modest duplex near the edge of town, far enough from Ridgeway that she'd never really thought about the Whitmore house, even during her childhood. But that morning, as she went down into the basement to fetch some old boxes, she found the staircase. Not leading up, but down, a new staircase. A spiral of old, soot-colored wood that hadn't been there yesterday or ever. It snaked into the earth like it had always belonged, buried deep, waiting for someone to notice. Nora didn't go down, but she did call the police. When they arrived, the staircase was gone. The officers rolled their eyes, blamed stress, said she probably saw shadows and imagined the rest. One of them laughed until he noticed a piece of her daughter's pink hair ribbon caught on the lowest step, and the footprint. Small, bare, still wet. Ellie was missing. That same night, 6 other families in Elmridge filed reports about strange things happening in their homes. Shadows walking across windows that should have reflected empty rooms. Static blaring from televisions that weren't plugged in. Children whispering names they shouldn't know, and always just out of view doors. Unmarked, unfamiliar, out of place. The town was unraveling, but it wasn't until Father Harlan vanished that panic truly set in. He'd served the town for 42 years, baptized 3 generations, buried half the town's oldest, a man who feared nothing. But during his Sunday sermon, as he read from the book of Psalms, he paused, looked up, his mouth fell open, and he dropped the Bible. "I hear her," he whispered. "She's in the floor." That was the last thing he said. They found his shoes neatly placed at the altar, his robe folded on the pew, and the trapdoor under the choir's platform wide open. It had never opened before. No hinges, no seams, just stone, solid for over a century, until it wasn't. By now the town's denial had crumbled. And yet, no one could answer the simplest question: what exactly had been let out of the Whitmore house when the light in the attic turned on? But some had theories, like Old Man Rush. He'd lived on the outskirts of Elmridge for over 70 years. Never married, rarely seen. People said he'd gone mad after his brother vanished in 1973, one of the first to go missing in the house. He showed up at the library that Tuesday, wild-eyed and muttering, clutching a journal full of charcoal sketches. "No one disappears," he told the head librarian, spittle flying from his lips. "They get absorbed. This thing, it's not a house. It wears the house, like skin." He pointed to one sketch. It was crude, but chilling: a staircase spiraling into a black hole, and at the bottom, a mouth full of arms instead of teeth. "It grows where it's fed," Rush said. "And now it's feeding again." That night the library burned down. Some said they saw lightning strike it. Others said they saw a figure step into the flame and not come out. Regardless, the journal was gone, and Rush vanished again. This time, likely forever. By the end of the week, 9 more people had disappeared, some from their homes, some from their cars. One from the middle of the grocery store, aisle 4, caught on camera. A flash of static, a scream that cut out halfway. Gone. The sheriff called in help from the state. But the roads began twisting. GPS maps stopped working. Roads that once led into town now looped back, sending drivers in circles. Some swore they drove for hours only to return to the same intersection, Elm and Dillridge, over and over. A few tried leaving on foot. They never returned. Meanwhile, the staircase kept appearing, always just long enough to be seen. Sometimes in basements, sometimes in closets, once in the middle of the grocery store's walk-in freezer. But it never stayed, and always the same humming sound just before it showed, low, throbbing, like a voice that wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. A small group began documenting it. Survivors, some of them. People who claimed to have seen something inside the Whitmore house. They called themselves the 13th Door. They met in secret, compared notes, looked for patterns. But the more they shared, the more they forgot. Literally, one member, Denise Harlow, brought 3 pages of notes to the meeting. She read them out loud, but when she tried to leave, she couldn't remember where she lived. Not her street, not her house, not even the color of her front door. By the next morning, she didn't know her name. They took her to Elmridge General, and on the way, she asked the driver a question. "Do you hear it breathing?" She died that night. Heart failure, the report said. But her eyes, they were gone. Not gouged out, just gone. Smooth skin where her sockets should have been. No blood, no pain, just absence. No one knew what to do anymore. Some called it a curse, others a punishment. But a few started whispering something else. That maybe it wasn't the house doing this. Maybe it was something inside the house, and it wanted to be let out. And someone, one of the 4 missing teens, had let it out. Which one? No one knew. But they were coming back, one by one, because 3 nights after Denise died, Jonah walked back into town, barefoot, shirtless, covered in dust. But it wasn't Jonah. He had his face, yes, his voice, his body. But when he spoke, it was in riddles. When she turns her head, he said, "Standing in the middle of Main Street, the walls come alive. We weren't supposed to open it, but Kara made us. She made us hear her." His eyes rolled back, and he laughed. A laugh that didn't belong to anyone human. Then he turned his head sharply to the left, and every mirror in town shattered. The sheriff locked him in a holding cell. But the next morning, the bars were melted, and Jonah was gone. All that remained was a drawing on the wall, a staircase spiraling endlessly into the shape of a screaming mouth. And below it, scrawled in ash, "The house isn't a place. It's a beginning." And it was only just getting started. It began with a hum. Not loud, not even audible at first, more like a pressure in the skull, a crawling presence that made silence unbearable. The town of Elmridge didn't sleep anymore. Not properly. Doors were double locked, windows nailed. Children were kept inside, and the church bells, which hadn't rung in years, chimed every night at 2:11 a.m. without anyone touching them. Those who were brave enough, or foolish enough, to investigate claimed the rope swung on its own, stiff and slow, as if being pulled by something heavy, something unseen. But no one was ready for what happened next. 3 days after Jonah returned, and then vanished again, the Whitmore house changed. It didn't just sit on Ridgeway Hill anymore. It grew. The trees around it bent away like they were trying to flee. The old fence, rusted and broken for decades, stood tall again, repaired overnight by no human hands, and then one by one, rooms started appearing on the outside of the house. Extra wings, extra windows, shifting walls that no one remembered being there before. But the worst part, the lights. Every night now, the attic light flickered in a steady rhythm, 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off, like a pulse, like Morse code. Some believed it was trying to speak, others said it was calling. But Kara's mother knew better. She hadn't spoken since her daughter disappeared, hadn't left the house. But that night, she walked barefoot to the police station, her hands bleeding from digging her nails into her palms. "She's not gone," she said, voice dry, eyes unfocused. She's underneath." They thought she meant emotionally, spiritually, grieving. But the next morning, her neighbor found something under the porch. A hole. No, not a hole. A tunnel, narrow, lined with teeth, not real ones, not bone. Wood. Hundreds of tiny splinters, sharpened and curled like gums gnashing from within the soil. And beneath the porch a finger. Pale. Young. With a silver ring Kara always wore. The town lost its mind. Barricades were thrown up around the house, not by police, not by officials, by the people. With their own tools, their own hands. They built burning heaps at every road leading to Ridgeway, hoping fire would keep whatever was in the house contained. But the house had other plans. It started sending pieces. The elementary school cafeteria opened late Monday morning. The lunch lady went to lift a bin of potatoes and found an eye looking back at her. Real, still wet, still blinking, not human, slightly too large, green with a slit pupil like a goat's. But it moved, and it watched her scream, across town. Dogs refused to enter their kennels. One farmer reported all of his chickens huddled in the corner of their coop, crushed against each other until they suffocated. And in the center of the pen, drawn in blood, was a spiral. Meanwhile, a group of teenagers started a live stream. They called themselves the Watchers. 5 of them, armed with flashlights, GoPros, and bravado. They slipped past the barricades and approached the Whitmore house, hoping to catch something they could sell or post, or brag about. They never made it inside. Halfway up the hill, the wind died. All 5 flashlights died. The cameras died. Phones stopped working. And when the lights came back, only 2 of them were there, both frozen, both bleeding from the nose. One of them whispering a phrase over and over, "It's watching me from the floorboards." He said it 2 times before his jaw locked in place and shattered from the tension. The other refused to speak. They were both institutionalized the next day. The footage, once recovered from a corrupted drive, showed only one clear frame, one that investigators still refuse to comment on publicly. It's a face. No, not a face. Faces. Dozens, maybe hundreds, packed into the wooden walls of the Whitmore house. Not carved, not drawn. Embedded, as if the wood had grown around them. Some with mouths open in a silent scream, others with eyes wide watching. And in the center of them all, Kara, not moving, but smiling. That image, known now only as Frame Ton 97, spread through the dark corners of the internet like wildfire. Most people claimed it was fake, an elaborate hoax, but those who stared at it too long began to experience things. Nightmares, bleeding ears, missing time. One man in Missouri gouged out his own eyes after printing the frame and taping it to his bedroom ceiling. When they found him, he'd written one phrase in blood across the walls, "THESR open." Back in Elmridge, the town was falling apart. Stores shuttered. Gas stations emptied. Whole families vanished without a word. But others stayed, trapped, as if something wouldn't let them go. Roads cracked. Cars refused to start. And at night, the sound of footsteps began to echo under their homes. Like someone, or something, was crawling between the floorboards, dragging long nails across the beams, pausing just beneath wherever someone tried to sleep. One woman, a nurse named Gloria, opened her pantry to find it infinitely deep. Not dark, but filled with flickering lights. And far below, she could just make out the shape of a staircase, spiraling down into nothing. That night, she disappeared. No forced entry. No blood, just a trail of flour leading into the pantry, and a single word carved into the shelves, Hanjar. By now, the sheriff's office had broken down. Half the force resigned. The other half stopped responding to calls. The mayor left a voicemail for her assistant saying she was going to knock on the door and ask it what it wants. Her car was found parked at the bottom of Ridgeway Hill, the engine running, the driver's seat empty, the doors locked from the inside. But the town's greatest fear came to life the night Malik returned. He walked into town just after midnight, naked, covered in hand-drawn spirals. His eyes were wide, lips sewn shut with what appeared to be human hair, but he was smiling. Smiling so hard his cheeks blood. People gathered, watched from behind curtains. And Malik walked straight down Main Street to the church, what was left of it, and dropped something on the front steps. A jawbone, Kara's, still wearing her necklace. Then he spoke, not with his mouth, but from the bells. They rang, impossibly, a warbled series of tones. And over the sound came Malik's voice. She's not the first. She won't be the last. The house was hungry, and now it knows your names. And then he collapsed. When they reached him, his eyes were gone. Not scooped, not burned, just not there. Skin where his eyes should be. And behind him, carved into the church doors, was something new. Not a spiral, not a mouth, but a map of Elmridge, with 10 houses marked in red, all still occupied, all families who had lived in the town the longest, and written beneath the map in blood FEAST. The house had made its decision. It wasn't waiting anymore. It was coming. They noticed it first from the water tower. At dawn. The sky still pale and bruised, Thomas Reed, the last technician who hadn't abandoned his post, climbed to check the signal boosters. And there, over the hill, past the burned-out trees and the shell of what used to be the high school gym, he saw it. A house. Not the Whitmore house. Not the one they all feared and whispered about. This one was different. It was red, not painted red, not brick, but red. Like the color had seeped from something alive, something bleeding, staining the walls with wet, sticky strokes. It hadn't been there the day before. He swore on it. Swore by everything holy that the land it stood on was empty, barren, just another black patch of earth that hadn't healed since the fire 5 years ago. But now, there it was. 2 stories. Slanted roof. One crooked chimney coughing smoke into the cold morning sky. No driveway. No porch. No windows. Just a door, and the feeling, immediate, sickening, wrong, that the house was watching him. Thomas climbed down fast. Too fast. Slipped the last 10 feet and broke his ankle clean. Laid in the gravel screaming until a patrol car found him. But when they asked him what had happened, he didn't say I fell. He said, it blinked. The red house became legend before sundown. In a town clawing for some thread of understanding, it became the new obsession. Some thought it was a sign, a second chance. Others said it was a trap, a distraction, a lure thrown out by whatever evil lived in Whitmore. But the old ones, the ones who remembered before the disappearances, before the cameras, before the screaming in the floors, they said it was worse. Because the red house wasn't new, it was returning. That night, for the first time in decades, the town's oldest record keeper, Mrs. Eloise Camden, unlocked the cellar beneath the library ruins. She brought up blueprints, land surveys, town plats from 1911. And there it was, buried in the yellowed maps, Structure B, listed simply as a service building, red, cross-hatched, forgotten. Except one note in the margin stood out, scrawled in tight cursive by a long, dead town surveyor. It follows the feast. That same night, the lights in the red house flicked on, all at once. The chimney exhaled a black smoke so thick it curled against the wind, and then the door opened. No one entered, no one left. But across town, the marked homes from the church map began to scream, every single one of them. The sheriff's house, marked first, erupted in noise. A piercing, guttural sound like hundreds of nails on glass, overlapped by a wet, dragging shuffle. His wife, already half crazed from fear, locked herself in the bathroom and tried to climb out the window. But the window wasn't glass anymore. It was skin. Soft, warm, veined. She screamed until her throat burst. By the time the responders arrived, the house was empty. Not ransacked, empty. No furniture. No photos. No light switches. Nothing but walls, ceiling, floor, and a puddle in the corner that smelled like rotten copper. In the center, carved into the wood with shaking hands, was the phrase it fed. It liked her. The other houses, 9 more, followed. Some collapsed in on themselves. Others melted. One turned completely inside out, its walls now on the lawn, its occupants pressed flat and silent like spilled paintings. And from each ruin, a single trail of footprints led away, bare, deep, dragging, straight toward the red house. Elmridge went silent. Even the birds stopped flying overhead. No crows, no bugs, no wind, just that hum again. The one beneath the skull. People began leaving en masse. At first it was cars, then on foot. Then some didn't leave at all. They vanished mid-sentence. A schoolteacher in the middle of explaining math to an empty classroom, a grocer counting cans, a girl brushing her hair. Gone. No sound, no flash, just absence. And the red house stood door wide open. No one dared enter, but someone was inside watching. Because now, every time someone looked at it too long, the door would slowly begin to close, and then slam back open, like it was breathing, like it was teasing. Then came Kara, at least something wearing Kara's face. She appeared in the square at 2:13 a.m., no shoes, filthy white dress, hair tangled and soaked in what looked like oil. She didn't speak at first, just walked in a wide circle, dragging a stick behind her in the dirt, drawing spirals again and again until the dirt was black with whatever she'd pulled from her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wrong. Too many, 3 on the left, 2 on the right, all blinking in different rhythms, and she said, "The house is not in Elmridge. Elmridge is in the house." She collapsed, was taken to the clinic, tied to a bed, screaming through her dreams, speaking in a voice not her own, sometimes male, sometimes childlike, sometimes nothing but static. They tried exorcisms, holy water, medication. She just kept laughing, until the laughter turned into weeping from inside the walls of the clinic. Even when she was unconscious, even when she was gagged, even when the room was empty. One nurse, desperate for a break, smuggled in her own daughter's toy, an old baby monitor, to keep watch on Kara during her night shift. She hoped it would catch if Kara moved or tried to hurt herself. It did, but not what she expected, because at exactly 3:00 a.m., the monitor picked up a voice, not Kara's, not even human, a voice made of many, overlapping in whispers and screams and sobs. She opened the 13th door. "We see you now. We are inside." That night, the red house's door closed, and for the first time locked, not with a click, with a scream. It screamed so loudly that glass cracked in homes 5 blocks away, that power grids fried, that everyone awake at that hour reported bleeding from at least 1 ear, and then silence. Inside Kara's clinic room, her bed was empty. No sign of struggle, just a red spiral drawn in blood on the mattress. But what made it worse, what drove the head nurse to retire that very night, was what the camera showed. Kara didn't get up. She didn't vanish. She simply sank. Sank straight down through the bed, through the floor, like the ground had turned to water, and she was being pulled into something underneath. Something waiting. Something patient. The footage ended with her fingertips scraping the tile, and one final whisper, barely caught in the mic, "It's building something." The next morning, the red house had windows, 12 of them, each filled with a face, some familiar, some new, some yours, because now it was looking back. No one built the red house. That was the first thing confirmed by every contractor, historian, and town elder brave or curious enough to stand near it. No permits, no blueprints, no history. It simply appeared. But it didn't grow like a normal house. It expanded like a wound, scabbing over the land in red slats and screaming seams, walls splitting and reshaping with a sick, wet groan in the quiet of night. But even more horrifying than its construction was what came next. It began with the voices, not in the house, in the walls of other homes. Elmridge, or what was left of it, had become a patchwork of terror. Blocks that still stood but felt thinner somehow, like the very fabric of reality in town had been stretched to its limits. Doors that used to creak now whispered. Light bulbs flickered in patterns. Radios turned on by themselves, always to static, but if you turned the dial just right, you'd hear voices. faint, high-pitched, overlapping, desperate. Some begged for help. Others begged to be left alone. And some laughed. Sheriff Dunley had retired weeks ago. No replacement was ever named. So when families began to flee the town, no one stopped them. But not everyone could leave. Not everyone was allowed to. Cars died on the road. Tires melted into the asphalt. One bus, carrying 22 desperate souls, was found still idling at the town's edge, headlights facing the horizon, driver's seat empty, every passenger turned to ash in their seats. No fire, no struggle, just ash and the scent of old wood smoke. The red house stood at the center of it all, its windows now full. Each face staring out, unblinking, unmoving, pale as wax. Some were children. Some were adults. But none of them were smiling. Not anymore. That's when Rachel Adams heard the tapping. It was late, past 3 a.m. Her husband was asleep beside her, or so she thought. But the tapping didn't come from the window. It came from the wall behind her bed. She held her breath. It tapped again. 3 times, then silence. Then came the voice. Low, gentle, too gentle. Rachel, it cooed. I found the cracks. She didn't sleep after that. The next morning, she pulled the bed away from the wall and screamed. The wallpaper was peeling in a perfect spiral. Beneath it, skin. Not drywall, skin. Warm to the touch. Beating, slow and steady, like a heart had been buried inside the plaster. She took a hammer to it. Not out of bravery. Out of panic, it blood. But not red, it blood voices. They poured out in a shriek of hundreds, crying, choking, whispering. She ran. No one blamed her. That same day, 3 more houses in Elmridge reported the same thing. Living walls, speaking wood, carpets that twitched underfoot like muscle. The town was changing. Not decaying, changing, becoming something else. And still, the red house stood untouched. No one had entered. No one dared. Until Henry Lake. Henry had lost everything. His wife, his twin sons. They vanished one night after reporting sounds in the basement. When he found their shoes stacked neatly at the top of the stairs and no sign of them below, something inside him snapped. He packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and a .38 revolver and walked up Ridgeway Hill like a man with nothing left to lose. He reached the red house at 4:06 p.m., and the door opened before he touched it. He stepped inside. The door closed, and the house shuddered. Those who watched from afar saw the whole thing, how the house breathed in that moment. How the chimney coughed up smoke that reeked of iron. How the sky directly above the roof darkened like a cloud had decided to hover only there. Henry didn't come out that night. But at 3:33 a.m., every phone in Elmridge buzzed at once. No ringtone, no messages, just static and a single image. A photo, grainy, black and white, of Henry, kneeling in a room with no walls, no ceiling, only faces. Countless faces rising from the floor beneath him. He was screaming, but his mouth was stitched shut. In one hand, he held a photograph of his sons. The next morning, that same photo was found tacked to the welcome sign at the town border. Beneath it, scrawled in wet soot, was the message, "The rooms remember." It became clear that the red house was more than a structure. It was a collector. Not just of people, but of moments, of pain, of the very things people thought they could forget. Because then came the dreams. Every night, the town slept, and the red house showed up, not just on Ridgeway, but in their dreams. They dreamt of walking through unfamiliar rooms, only to realize each space was a memory. A hospital waiting room where a loved one died. A basement where someone said something they could never take back. An attic where something bad happened that they swore they'd never tell anyone. But the red house remembered. It led them from room to room, never letting them leave, until they woke up drenched in sweat, fingernails broken from clawing their own skin. Some couldn't wake up at all, slipped into comas, and even in sleep their lips moved, whispering. The walls have roots, the roots have mouths, and the mouths are hungry. The local paper stopped printing. The website that hosted the town's bulletin board went dark, and still people watched. The red house had become a beacon. For thrill seekers, paranormal investigators, cultists, live streamers, they came with cameras, with drones, with arrogance. Most never made it back down the hill. One drone stream, broadcast for over 6 hours, captured the house from above. Nothing moved. No creatures. No horror. Just stillness. Until hour 6. The camera drifted close to one of the second-floor windows, zoomed in, and saw its own reflection, staring back. Not a drone. A human face, blinking. Watching it, the feed cut to black. It never came back online. People began boarding up their homes not to keep things out, but to keep their walls in. They reported wallpaper moving at night, trying to peel itself away. Floors cracking open, oozing tar. Refrigerators humming in off, key lullabies. And always, always, the whisper. Soft, subtle. Let us in, let us out. We are underneath. Until one night the whisper stopped. The town held its breath. The red house pulsed once. Its roof curled upward like the spine of a beast stretching after slumber. And then the 13th window appeared. A round, open eye, bleeding. And from it came a voice not heard since the very beginning. Karas, don't look away. It sees you now. The red house was no longer watching. It was remembering. And soon, it would come knocking. It didn't sound like a knock at first. Not the kind you'd expect from a neighbor, a visitor, even the police. It was slower, lower, like bones tapping on hollow wood. One by one, rhythmic, as if trying to match your heartbeat. Elmridge was quiet that night, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you check your locks twice and keep the lights on just a little longer. But even light didn't help anymore. Not since the knocking started. 3 knocks, then silence. And then again, 3 knocks. No door was safe. It didn't matter if you lived on the far end of town or across from the ruins of the Camden Library. The sound came. Steady. Measured. Intentional. Not random, not rushed. It always found you. Even if you were hiding in your basement, behind 6 deadbolts, buried in blankets with a flashlight and a prayer on your lips, it found you. The worst part, it never came from the same place. Sometimes the front door, sometimes the closet, sometimes the wall above your bed, and sometimes from inside the house. It started small. The Kellys were first. A mother and son, holed up in their attic, barricaded with furniture and shelves. The boy heard it, swore it came from the vent. The mother said it was just the wind, but the vent popped open 2 minutes later, and the knocking came again. This time, closer. Then came the whimpering. Not from them. From behind the wall, a voice, tiny and scared, whispering, "Let me out, it's cold in here." The Kellys were never seen again. The attic door was open when responders arrived. Not broken, not forced, just open. And the attic floor was gone. Nothing but dirt. And what looked like handprints, pressed deep into the soil. By the end of the week, 20 homes had reported similar disturbances. But it wasn't just the knocking anymore. It was what came after, when the 3rd knock was answered. Most didn't survive long enough to regret it. The living rooms would warp. Hallways would stretch. One man walked down his stairs to answer the front door after the 3rd knock and never stopped walking. His wife said she heard his steps for over 30 minutes, getting fainter. Lower, like he was being led into the earth. The house itself had no basement. And yet, he never came back up. Then came the mimicry. A new game the Red House had started playing. It used voices now. Familiar ones. Voices you couldn't help but trust. "Mom, is that you, Uncle Ray? Babe, I forgot my keys." All coming from the door, all timed right after the knock. And always, always, after the 3rd knock, the voice would end with a sentence no human would ever say, "I can't stay dead forever." Even children weren't spared. Little Abby Florence answered her window late one night because she heard her dog barking outside. Or so she thought. Her parents were asleep. She crept out of bed, peered out past the curtain, and saw Rufus sitting by the hedge, tail wagging. But the eyes were wrong, and his mouth didn't open when he barked. It was smiling, She opened the window. By morning, the Florences found only her nightgown, folded neatly on the windowsill, and muddy paw prints on the ceiling. The red house now pulsed with energy. Its 13th window opened wider each night. The eye inside it no longer passive. It watched, blinked, shifted, and one night it wept. Black tears dripped from it onto the lawn below, killing every blade of grass they touched. Wherever the droplets landed, the earth split slightly, like lips parting to whisper secrets too old for language. Then came Joan again, or something that still wore his skin. He walked through town like a prophet, dressed in rags soaked with soot. His mouth moved constantly, mumbling nonsense, until he reached the center of town and screamed, "The house is not in Elmridge! It is not even in time! It is memory that has learned how to rot!" He dropped to his knees, ripped his shirt open. Carved into his chest was a new message, one letter at a time: "We are the rooms. We are the walls." And then, from inside his mouth, something moved, not a tongue, not words. A hand, small, like a child's. It reached out, clawed the air, and then was pulled back inside. He died 30 seconds later. No blood, no struggle. He just collapsed, deflated, like he'd been hollow all along. They buried him the next morning, but the ground rejected him. Literally, the casket was pushed back up through the soil, splintered, shattered, and inside it, nothing. Just ash. And the phrase, "He was only a door." From then on, no one in Elmridge slept at night. No one dared. You couldn't, not when the walls moved. They didn't do it dramatically. They weren't violent, just subtle. Your bedroom would shift 6 inches to the left while you blinked. Your bathroom mirror would reflect a hallway that didn't exist. Your kitchen window would show a sky that wasn't yours, filled with spirals, and teeth, and flickering lights that twitched in time with your heartbeat. And always that knock, 3 taps. No more, no less, and then the voice. "We remember when you lied. We remember when you watched her drown. We remember what you buried." It didn't accuse at random. It knew. The red house knew. It wasn't feeding on flesh. It was feeding on regret, on shame. It used memory as bait. It learned how to weaponize guilt. One man, Gerald Witt, walked into the church with a crowbar and tried to fight the walls. He screamed that he remembered what he'd done in 1987, and he was ready to be punished. But he wasn't taken. He was left. Left to rot alone in a room that would not open. His screams swallowed by wallpaper that pulsed with breath. The church has been locked ever since. The house at Ridgeway doesn't even resemble a house now. It pulses. Its shape changes. Every night, it seems to grow closer, even though it hasn't moved. Some say it's not a house anymore. It's a mouth. A mouth trying to speak a name too big for human tongues. And it speaks in knocks. 3. Then silence. And if you answer it, you don't vanish. You just stop being you. Because once it finds the crack in your guilt, in your shame, in your memory, it moves in. And from that moment on, you become another room. It began with names. Not written, not spoken, carved. One by one, they appeared across Elmridge, not in letters, but in grooves. Etched deep into the walls of homes, into the sides of trees, into frost on windows. Always the same length, always the same angle. Like something with long fingers and longer patience had scratched them in under the cover of night. And the names weren't random. They belonged to people still alive. At least, at first. The first was Matthew Graves. His name appeared on the wall above his fireplace, just before dawn. Perfect, legible, still warm to the touch. He laughed it off, thought it was a prank. But the next morning, his bedroom was gone. Not messy, not ransacked. Gone. Door sealed over. No drywall, no studs, just smooth plaster where it used to be. He tried calling his wife. She was in the room when he went to sleep. But the call wouldn't connect. He pounded on the wall. Screamed. Tore at it with his bare hands. By nightfall, Matthew's name had appeared again. This time inside the town's post office, carved into the mailbox that used to belong to his father. That night, Matthew vanished. And the next morning, every wall in his house began to whisper. Not loudly, not urgently, just a soft hum of syllables that didn't make sense until you realized they were his name, repeated over and over, as if the house was practicing, rehearsing for something. He wasn't the last. Names kept appearing, dozens, then hundreds, some on ceilings, others on dishes, scrawled in the dust of old books or seared into the pages of Bibles left too close to the fire. And no one could predict when or where a name would show up. People woke up with them carved into their skin, faint and pink like healing scars. One woman found her name on every mirror in her house, backwards, staring at her as she brushed her teeth, combed her hair, held her breath. She was gone by morning. But the worst part wasn't the names. It was what came after. Rooms. New ones. No one built them. They simply appeared. You'd open your hallway closet to find an unfamiliar door. You'd blink, and your guest bedroom now had 2 windows. One of them showing a view of something that wasn't Elmridge. Something with trees made of ribs, and a sky that twitched like muscle. Or maybe you'd go to fetch a towel from the linen cabinet, only to find a stairwell spiraling down into nothing but red light and the sound of breathing. And always there was a plaque. Small, bronze, unpolished. At the entrance of each new room, and on it, your name. The first person brave enough to go into their room was Eleanor Cartwright, age 62. Former librarian, known for never being afraid of anything, her room appeared behind her bookshelf, an archway pulsing faintly. Her name hung above it, and something in her said she had to see. She packed a flashlight, left a note, then stepped inside. She came out 2 hours later, older. Her hair, once snow white, had turned black again. Her eyes were gone, not hollow, just filled in, as if her body had closed them from the inside. And when she spoke, it was with a mouth that didn't move. I saw myself. I saw what I am when I don't lie about it anymore. She died that night, not from wounds, not from sickness. She just stopped. No heartbeat, no breath, but her mouth kept whispering for hours. They buried her in the church cemetery, far from the red house. The next morning, her grave was empty. But the bronze plaque with her name on it, it was nailed to the red house's front door, and the door was open again. By now, Elmridge was nearly empty. No traffic, no phones, no mail. Only the red house and the rooms. They had spread beyond the town limits. A trucker on the highway claimed he stopped for gas and found a restroom that hadn't been there before. No lights. Just a flickering red bulb and a door with his wife's name on it. She'd been dead for 4 years. He left his rig running and fled on foot. 2 miles later, he turned to look back and saw the gas station had changed. It was taller, older, and in the window, someone waved at him with a hand that bent in too many places. Even places on the internet reported strange things. One live streamer from Chicago filmed a hallway in his apartment that now had an extra door. He opened it, just a crack, and the static from his mic blew out every speaker on the stream. Before the feed cut, he mouthed 2 words. It knows. By now, it wasn't just about fear. It was about memory. The red house didn't want blood. It wanted truth. It made rooms out of guilt, doors out of secrets. It gave shape to every awful thing you pretended not to remember. And then it made you live in it. Because the moment your name appeared, your room was built. And once your room existed, you had to go in. Some resisted, taped over their names, painted them out, burned their houses. One even cut his name into ribbons from every record, license, passport, certificates. But the house doesn't forget. The more you try to erase your name, the louder it whispers it back. One man woke to find it written in condensation on every surface of his body, forehead, chest, fingertips, eyelids. When he blinked, it disappeared. When he screamed, it echoed back in a voice that wasn't his. The house was claiming. And every name it took, every person who entered their room, became another part of its floor plan. Kara had said it once: the house isn't growing, it's remembering. And now we knew what that meant. It was building us. One room at a time. Until every secret had a wall. Until every lie had a window. Until the last name was carved. And the door to the final room opened. The one that didn't have a name on it. Because it was waiting for you to write it in. By now, those who remained in Elmridge no longer asked how or why. The question had changed. It wasn't "what is the red house" anymore. It was, how long until it calls me? Everyone had seen it by now. That impossible building at the end of Ridgeway Hill, no longer bound by physics or symmetry. Its windows blinked in unison. Its bricks breathed. And its rooms multiplied like cancer beneath the town, branching unseen, reaching into cellars, basements, garages, and mines. That's where it hurt most, the mind. People didn't just forget things in Elmridge anymore. They forgot they'd forgotten. Whole lifetimes evaporated in a moment. A man named Lucas stumbled into the pharmacy screaming that his daughter was missing. He shoved the clerk, tore through shelves, demanded medication he couldn't name. The pharmacist, shaking, told him he'd never had a daughter, that he'd never even been married. Lucas ran home in a frenzy and found her shoes still at the door, her toys scattered across the living room, a birthday banner with the name Emily still fluttering in the hallway, but no photos, no drawings, no child, only a new room in the hallway, one that hadn't been there that morning, one with no handle, only a small plaque that read "We remembered for you." He tried breaking it. He didn't come out. The next day, the neighbors heard something from behind the wall, not screaming, rocking, like a wooden chair. Slow, steady, endless, and humming. A lullaby that had no melody, but still sounded like childhood. The walls of Elmridge no longer hid what they were. They had become living history, sheets of muscle shaped by sin and silence. It wasn't just the red house that shifted anymore. Every house did. Rooms moved when you weren't looking. Floors sloped where they had once been flat. Even staircases twisted back on themselves, leading you in circles until you stopped knowing what floor you were on or what year. One family tried to escape with mirrors strapped to their backs, believing if they could see what was behind them, they could outsmart it. They were found in an abandoned barn, turned completely inside out, not their bodies, their reflections. The glass showed them standing still, mouths open, eyes wide, but the real bodies were collapsed, empty husks, like something had stepped into their image and left them hollow. But what made it worse, what twisted the knife, was this: for each victim claimed, a new room appeared, and those rooms weren't hidden anymore. They began appearing in plain sight, on rooftops, in alleyways. One hovered 12 feet above the high school gym, suspended by nothing, rotating slowly, windows showing storms that didn't exist and staircases that led into mouths made of floorboards. The survivors, those still rational enough to call themselves people, began calling them memory rooms. Not because you remembered things inside them, but because they remembered for you. Whatever you buried, whatever you drank away, ignored, lied about, it waited there, perfectly preserved. And once you entered, you became the room. They found Lydia Marsh, standing motionless in the middle of her kitchen, her hands pressed against the open pantry like she was holding it shut. She hadn't moved in 14 hours. The EMTs said she was catatonic. But her blood pressure, her heartbeat, they were fighting. Her body strained with invisible force, as if she were wrestling with something from the other side of the wall. It wasn't until one of the EMTs leaned close to her ear that he heard it. Whispers. Not from Lydia, from the pantry, a voice that sounded like her mother's, repeating the same phrase again and again. "We know what you did to your brother." They tried to sedate her. She bit her own tongue off, and then vanished, not in a puff of smoke, not with a scream. She just wasn't in the kitchen anymore. The door was closed, and behind it, the pantry was filled with water, salt water, and in it, a pair of small shoes floated on the surface. Not Lydia's, a boy's. Size 4. Meanwhile, back on Ridgeway Hill, the red house had begun to sing. Not music, not words. A sound made of sighs and regrets. A harmony of moans, whimpers, and soft tapping. Like 1,000 people trying to apologize through the walls. And every hour on the hour, the 13th window opened a little wider. People began seeing things inside it. Not reflections, not people. Moments, a breakup, a death. An accident you could have prevented if you'd only said something. The window didn't just watch, it showed. Your own past, twisted and exposed. Like someone had turned your worst memory into wallpaper. Then came the children. No one knew where they came from. They wandered the streets at night, barefoot, humming tuneless songs, faces blank, eyes black as tar pits. They knocked on doors with soft, gentle fingers. But they never spoke. They only pointed. To rooms. Rooms that hadn't existed the night before. Rooms that had your handwriting on the door. Some people followed. Some screamed. Some tried to fight. But the children never reacted. They just kept pointing and humming and walking away. And behind them, the doors opened, one by one, each one revealing you in some awful form, your greatest shame, your deepest fear. The moment you became someone you swore you never would, and the rooms would show you over and over and over again, until you believed it, until you stopped denying, until you understood this was never a haunting, it was judgment, not from God, not from hell, but from memory itself. Every awful thing you'd buried came back as architecture. Every lie became a hallway, every regret, a staircase, and every denial, another room with your name on it. Because the red house didn't need to chase you. It just had to wait for the day you finally ran into yourself. And when that day came, it was already home. By now, no one knocked in Elmridge. Not people, not neighbors, not police. To knock was to admit you didn't understand what this place had become. To knock was to pretend things still followed rules. And Elmridge didn't follow rules anymore. It followed truths. Not the kind you told others, but the ones you refused to tell yourself. The kind that festered like rot behind your ribs. The kind that shaped you. The kind that the red house built with. People stopped opening doors altogether. They sealed them, boarded them, welded them shut. And yet, they kept opening. New ones. Impossible ones. Doors that shouldn't have existed at all. In kitchens. Inside closets. In mirrors. In the air. Thin, flickering seams in reality that blinked into view when you said something untrue. It began with a lie. A harmless one. Diane Marin told her husband she was fine. Just tired. Just a headache. He nodded, kissed her cheek, went back to watching TV. And behind her, in the space between their kitchen counters, a door slid into existence like it had always belonged. Neither of them noticed it that night, but the next morning it was open. And it had stairs. Not down. Up. Even though there was no second floor. Diane didn't remember lying. That was the point. The lie wasn't to him. It was to herself. About the appointment she skipped. About the symptoms she ignored. About the way her skin had started to itch when the red house first blinked into existence. She told herself it was nothing, and the door opened because of that. When she finally saw it, it was already too late. There were footprints on the stairs. Bare. Small. Following them up, she found herself at the top. Pale. Smiling. Holding a mirror. Not a normal one. This mirror didn't reflect what you looked like. It reflected what you denied. She screamed. The room didn't echo. The room absorbed the sound. That was the last thing her husband heard. The scream. And then silence. When he rushed into the kitchen, there was no door between the counters. But her shoes were still there. And in the sink, the mirror, cracked. Still humming. It was different from before. The red house no longer hunted just those who remembered. It hunted those who refused to, because lies were the final building material. It used fear to open the basement. It used shame to build the walls. But lies built the doorways. And the town had plenty of those. People began speaking in circles, afraid to say anything definitive, I think I'm okay. Maybe I didn't see it. It's probably not real. Each time someone hedged the truth, a door appeared nearby. Briefly. Flickering. Testing them. Waiting for another denial to push it open. Some tried to outsmart it. One man, a philosophy professor, took a vow of silence. For weeks, he didn't speak a word, not even to himself. He believed if he said nothing, the house couldn't trap him in a lie. They found him in the middle of the town square, curled into a ball, his mouth sewn shut, not with thread, but with roots. Living, red, pulsing vines that had grown from his tongue and wrapped around his lips. His eyes had been replaced with knobs, dork knobs, and carved into his chest were the words, "A silent mouth still holds secrets." That same week, the local library, once burned down, reappeared. No announcement, no construction. It just stood there again one morning. Whole, clean, inviting, only one door, and above it, the words "Carfeso." People didn't want to go in. But the doors in their homes started shaking. The walls began to bleed from corners. Mirrors refused to show faces. And every dog in town howled for 13 minutes straight before going completely still. Some residents gave in. They walked into the library quietly. Others watched from a distance. None who entered ever came back out the front. But they were seen again, in windows, in walls. One teenage boy saw his father's face smiling out from the spine of a book. Another saw her sister waving through the reflection of a rain puddle, even though her body had been buried months ago. The library wasn't a building. It was a room that fed on guilt. And once you stepped inside, it filed you, categorized you, labeled you under a secret only you remembered, and then shelved you somewhere deep, where your memories wouldn't rot, where others could check you out if they needed a reminder of what you did. Because that was the next evolution of the Red House. It stopped collecting secrets just to torment you. Now, it was sharing them, spreading them. Memory was contagious in Elmridge. You'd walk past someone's house and suddenly feel shame that wasn't yours. You'd dream of arguments you'd never had. You'd wake up crying over a mistake someone else made 20 years ago. And soon, you weren't sure what was yours and what was theirs. Because the Red House blurred the line between guilt and identity, between lie and legacy. It didn't just remember you. It rewrote you, made you part of someone else's horror, until none of it was separate, until the whole town became one memory, stitched together by doors that opened every time you told yourself, "I'm fine." One by one, they cracked open, all across Elmridge, and from inside each door, a whisper, "It's okay. You never meant to hurt them. You were just a child. They deserved it." That was the final lie, the one that always opened the last door, the one that didn't lead to a room, but to the place beneath the rooms, where memory didn't just live. It grew teeth. There was something underneath it all. That was the whisper that began spreading through Elmridge after the 10th door opened inside a single home. Not 10 houses. One. 10 doors. All in the same house, stacked like ribs in a twisted spine, crammed into spaces that hadn't existed the night before. Some led nowhere. Some looped back. One opened into a hallway filled with clocks that all ticked in reverse. But the final one, the lowest, the smallest, the one hidden behind the dryer, led down. That was where it changed. Because for all the fear the Red House inspired, for all the rooms it built from shame and guilt, for all the voices in the walls and the faces in the mirrors, it had still been above ground, still part of the waking world, still inside the frame of what the town thought it could comprehend. But not this. This new door, this staircase behind the dryer, this was something deeper. The man who found it was named Curtis. He didn't tell anyone at first. He couldn't. Not because he was afraid of what they'd think, but because the moment he saw it, the door took his voice. Not metaphorically. Literally. He opened the dryer, found a wooden hatch, touched it, and the sound just left him. No more breath, no more chords. Just empty air where his voice used to be. He scratched a message into the floor with a spoon. I can still hear myself screaming down there. He went in anyway. They know that because his wife followed him a day later, after finding the spoon and hearing the hatch groan open again. She only made it 3 steps down before the smell hit her. Rot, not of bodies, of ideas, of thoughts turned rancid. She swore the air down there had texture, thick and oily like spoiled milk, like regret you could chew. She screamed his name, but her voice didn't echo. It slid like it hit something soft and wet just out of sight. Curtis never came back, but someone did. That night, something climbed up the stairs. Something wearing his face, but not his bones. It slumped into the hallway, hands dragging, skin hanging loose like a mask that hadn't been fastened. His eyes blinked too often, mouth smiling when it shouldn't. And when it opened its lips, his voice poured out, too loud, too flat, too wrong. Like it had learned the idea of Curtis, but hadn't mastered the shape yet. I don't want to remember anymore, it said. I want to chew it all out. Then it collapsed, convulsing. Its jaw snapped open, wider than any human's, wider than its skin could hold. And from the mouth came teeth, not arranged like a person's, spiraled, layered, infinitely deep, a well of fangs. And from that mouth, a whisper, you built this with your silence. From that moment on, the people of Elmridge knew there was something worse than being remembered. It was being eaten by memory. Not just consumed, digested. The thing that wore Curtis's shape didn't rot or decay. It stayed in the middle of his home for 3 days, jaw open, teeth churning, chewing nothing. But every time someone passed too close, they'd flinch, as if their thoughts were being pulled toward it. One man walked past and forgot the names of his children. Another forgot his own name. A third dropped to his knees, sobbing, begging someone, anyone, to make the chewing stop. But the sound was in his head, and it didn't stop. The town began calling it the Maw, not a creature, not a demon, but a process, a function of the red house that had finally made its way to the surface. Memory had always been alive here. Now, it had developed an appetite, one that grew each time someone denied what they'd buried. The rooms were no longer just metaphors or traps, they were bait. Every door was a lure, and the house, the real house, was down there beneath them all, feeding, expanding. They discovered the tunnels next. Not man-made, not carved. They were grown. Veins of dark wood and tooth, colored roots spiraling beneath foundations, connecting homes like blood vessels. And every tunnel had that same oily, thick air, that same hum of chewing. And somewhere in those tunnels, rooms. Endless rooms, not built by hand, built by remorse. Some had beds made of apology letters never sent. Others had walls covered in every time you said I'm fine when you weren't. One had an entire ceiling formed from missed calls, the ringtones still echoing faintly in a loop. And then came the rooms with nothing inside them. Those were the worst, because the walls weren't blank. They were smooth, polished, like teeth. And if you stood in them too long, you'd hear the question, always whispered, always the same. What haven't you told yourself yet? Some answered. And the moment they did, the floor would open. A maw, another maw, ready to chew that truth into architecture, to make it a hallway, a stairwell, a memory someone else might walk into one day, not knowing it wasn't theirs. The red house wasn't growing randomly. It was using people's truths like blueprints, turning trauma into tunnels, shame into thresholds, and lies into locks, until it had shaped something vast and terrible under the entire town. Something you could never walk out of because the walls were you. And then the day came when the sky changed. Not the color, the texture. Clouds stopped moving. The sun held still for 13 hours, casting the same long shadow of the red house across every inch of Elmridge. And in that shadow, doors opened everywhere at once. No warning, no whisper, just open. And behind every door, teeth. Hundreds, thousands, smiling, ready. Because now, the house didn't need you to walk in. It was coming up, and it was hungry. The morning the sun refused to move, everything in Elmridge became wrong in a way the body felt before the mind could understand. It was like waking up and realizing the air had weight, like the sky itself was pressing down on the town, holding it still, making every breath drag just a second too long. The light stayed frozen in that strange gold. Early afternoon, maybe, though no one could say for sure. Time had stopped making sense. Not just the clocks, which had already given up weeks ago, but time itself. The birds never flew. Shadows never shifted. The red house cast its silhouette like a monument across all of Elmridge, long and angular and jagged, touching everything. Every window. Every road. Every room. And no one could move through it. At first, it felt like a superstition. Don't step in the shadow. Don't let it touch your skin. People avoided it instinctively, stepping around it, leaning away as it crept across porches and bedrooms. But then Marla Kemp dared her husband to walk through it. She laughed, that dry, nervous laugh people use when they're already scared but pretending not to be. He smiled, took 3 steps into the red house's shadow, and froze. Mid-stride, eyes wide, 1 foot in the air, not dead, stuck, like he'd been pulled into a photo, into a paused memory he wasn't ready to remember. She screamed, pushed him. Nothing. His body didn't fall, didn't move. He stayed there for 9 hours until the sun finally budged again. 1 inch. 1 breath. And then he dropped like his bones had been waiting to hit the ground. He came to a few minutes later, sobbing, unable to speak a word except 1 teeth. They found bite marks on the soles of his feet. Dozens. Tiny, too uniform, too exact, not from an animal. More like a memory trying to take shape. Because that's what the red house was doing now. It wasn't just building rooms from your past. It was trying to wear it. To walk inside it. To move through your guilt like it was muscle and tendon and bone. It was studying you. Not to torment. Not even to punish. To become you. The house wasn't satisfied with your fear anymore. It wanted your shape, so it cast its shadow across the whole town. And it waited. That afternoon, a child named Oscar made a mistake. He stepped into the shade for only a second to grab his baseball. The shadow passed over his shoulder like a breeze. And then the screaming started. Not from Oscar, from every other child in town. At the exact same moment, each one fell to the ground, convulsing, clawing at their mouths, crying out one name, not Oscar's, but someone else's. Names they had no memory of knowing. Names that hadn't been spoken in years. Some were old teachers. Some were victims from the original disappearances. One boy screamed his own grandmother's name over and over until his jaw dislocated. And Oscar, he vanished. Not into thin air, into the light. His shadow remained, burned into the ground like a soup print, arms outstretched. As if he'd tried to stop something that hadn't even touched him yet. After that, the shadow wasn't just something to avoid. It was a map, a moving diagram of all the parts of Elmridge that no longer belonged to Elmridge. It slithered around homes like fingers, crept into bedrooms. It learned, and when night came, the shadow didn't go away. Instead, it rose, lifted from the pavement like mist, and took form. That was the first time people saw them, the shadowed ones. Not ghosts, not demons. People-shaped silhouettes made from regret, walking backward. Never speaking, their faces smudged like water-soaked ink. They didn't attack. They didn't chase. They simply pointed. At you. And when they pointed, a new door opened behind you. You never saw it happen. You just know. By the time you turned around, it was already there. Sometimes in your living room. Sometimes in your head. Because now the red house didn't need space. It had learned how to build doors in thought. A single stray guilt. A whispered I shouldn't have done that, or I never told anyone. And the handle would appear. Not physically, but in your memory. A choice you didn't remember making. A door you were suddenly aware you had already opened long ago. One man tried to end it all. Set his house on fire. Drenched it in kerosene. lit a match and screamed into the blaze. But when the fire brigade arrived, they found him standing in the center of the living room, untouched. The fire was still burning around him, but not on him. And the walls, they were no longer drywall. They were photographs, all of him. Every moment he regretted. One showed him slapping his son. One showed him lying to his wife. One showed him standing alone at a funeral, expressionless, because he couldn't feel grief. The room didn't burn. It watched, and above the fireplace, a plaque. You built this room with silence. The fire is only for show. He didn't make a sound for the rest of his life. Because by now, it was clear the red house didn't kill you. It turned you into a story. One it could file away. One it could reopen. One it could walk back into when it needed more material. And the shadow, it moved on, house to house, mind to mind, memory to memory, until everything the town used to be became a floorboard. Until no one in Elmridge knew if they were remembering something, or being remembered. It had no door, no frame, no sign it was ever there, until it was. The hallway appeared not with a bang, but with an absence. It wasn't built or carved or revealed. It erased whatever had been there before. A hallway that began the moment someone tried to forget. A hall that grew every time you flinched from a memory, looked away from a truth, told yourself, it wasn't that bad. That's when the walls shifted. Not loud, not violent, just subtle. It began with Margaret Rain, widow. Lived alone on the edge of Old Elm Street, where the red house's shadow always arrived 5 minutes earlier than everywhere else. Margaret had been trying not to think about something that happened in 1964, a child, a cold lake, a lie she told so often she'd started to believe it. But memory, in Elmridge, wasn't yours to control anymore. That morning, she went to get tea from the kitchen and found a new turn in her hallway. At first she thought she was disoriented. She lived there for 30 years. She knew her walls like her own heartbeat. But suddenly, the bathroom door was gone, and in its place, a narrow corridor that seemed to stretch slightly further every time she blinked. The wallpaper didn't match. It pulsed faintly. The floorboards were uneven, soft like they hadn't settled yet, like they were still being formed. She stood at the entrance for hours, trembling, watching it inch forward in silence like a snake uncoiling. And behind her, her house slowly forgot her. Photos lost faces. Books she'd read cover to cover were now blank inside. Even the mirror didn't reflect her anymore. Just the empty hallway. She called for help. No one came. She walked outside and no one recognized her. Not her neighbors. Not the town clerk. Not even her own son. Who'd arrived to check on her after days of silence? He stood on the lawn, staring at the house in confusion, and whispered, "I swear this lot's been empty for years." She screamed his name. He flinched. Then walked away, because she was no longer remembered. The hallway had grown, and Margaret was now inside it. Some say they still see her through second-story windows, not moving, just standing. Frozen mid-step like a dream held in place. That's when the town realized the red house wasn't just feeding on memory. It was punishing forgetfulness. You didn't have to be a killer. You didn't have to bury bodies or break promises or build regrets. All you had to do was try to forget one thing you shouldn't have. A face, a moment, a single truth, and the hallway would appear, longer each time. People began trying to remember everything. Old journals were torn open. Home videos rewound endlessly. Ex-lovers called late at night. Voices shaking as they confessed things from decades ago. But the house always knew when it wasn't real. Because truth has a temperature. And the red house could feel it. One couple, the Mortons, recited their wedding vows to each other every night like a prayer, hoping it would keep the walls from shifting. But the night herald forgot the name of his wife's first cat. Just a single, small, trivial thing. There was a new hallway in the living room. It didn't go far, just 5 feet at first. But by morning it stretched 30, too. And by nightfall, it had windows. Windows showing moments neither of them remembered sharing. A fight they never had. A car ride that ended in silence. A hospital bed. They stopped sleeping. They tried to seal it with boards and plaster. But every time they blinked, the hallway would be behind them again. Further. Deeper. Showing memories that didn't belong to either of them, yet still felt familiar. Because now the red house wasn't just harvesting memory. It was rewriting it. It learned to fill in the gaps. And if you couldn't remember something, it decided what happened. Some of the new hallways began looping. A man would walk through one, chasing the sound of his daughter crying, only to end up back in his kitchen, holding her doll, his hands wet with something thick and red. Others ended in rooms you never wanted to see again. Rooms where someone said goodbye and never returned. Rooms you'd only ever seen once in your dreams. Rooms with you, sitting and smiling, whispering, "I remember for you now." It wasn't just torment. It was replacement. The red house was becoming the town's collective memory, and no one knew what had really happened anymore. Had Kara opened the first door? Or had someone else? Had Cody Trenner vanished? Or had he been built? Elmridge wasn't collapsing. It was forgetting itself. Street names faded. Trees changed color overnight. A whole row of houses on Franklin Street was simply gone one morning, replaced with a field of wild bone, white flowers that buzzed softly when the wind passed. And always, on the edge of every fading memory, that soft, quiet corridor would appear. No knock, no whisper, just presence. And once you walked into your hallway, even for a second, you were no longer sure if you had ever left, because some doors didn't trap you. They made you forget you ever opened them. And some hallways, they keep growing until nothing is left but the version of you the red house needs. Because that house it isn't just haunted. It's hungry for your place in the story. And if you forget who you were, it remembers for you, and it writes you in. It didn't go up. It didn't go down. It went sideways, as if space had folded and the rules no longer applied. The staircase first appeared in the middle of Palmer Grocery, hovering just inches above the linoleum floor, turning in on itself like a coiled tongue. It had no railing, no visible support, and yet it pulsed faintly, as though something massive, just below sight, was breathing it into shape. The manager called the police, but when they arrived, it wasn't there. The aisles were back. The freezer hummed. But those who had seen it couldn't stop remembering. Worse, they couldn't stop dreaming about it. Every night for 6 days, they walked the staircase in their sleep. Their bodies stayed still, twitching, murmuring. But their minds followed that impossible turn. The descent didn't spiral like a normal staircase. It bent, twisted, moved in fractured loops. They described walls that wept honey, thick shadows, and steps that whispered questions beneath their feet. Where were you when it happened? Why didn't you say no? What didn't you tell them before they died? Each person had a different dream. But all of them ended in the same way: a room with no ceiling. A room with mirrors that didn't show you. A room where your footsteps arrived before you did. And in the center of that room, a stairwell that pulsed like a throat waiting to swallow. They called it the Winding. At first, only a few people claimed to have seen it. But by the end of the week, it began appearing in homes, in attics, in garages, sometimes beneath manholes that hadn't been opened in decades. You'd turn around, and it would be there, always just appearing in the corner of your vision, just beyond what your brain could explain. And it was tempting. It was beautiful in the way cliffs are, terrible, inevitable, calling to something that lives in the pit of your stomach. The first to willingly descend was a girl named Maisie, 13 years old. She left a note for her parents: "I think it remembers where I'm supposed to be." They found her footprints, 47 steps down. Then nothing. But her voice remained. Drifting. It came through vents, through drains, Through the hum of your fridge late at night, she wasn't screaming. She was explaining, like a teacher speaking softly in class, over and over. If you go far enough down, you come out inside someone else. That's when the dreams changed. People stopped seeing their own memories on the staircase. Now they saw others, a neighbor's funeral, a stranger's argument, a war they'd never fought in, a moment on a cliff with a boy who whispered, "Promise you won't look, none of it theirs." And yet they felt the regret. Felt it curl in their chest like something burrowing behind the ribs. Because the red house had shifted again. It no longer wanted just your guilt. It wanted you to carry someone else's, to spread it, absorb it, walk into a life that didn't belong to you and mourn it like it did. Some people began finding photos in their wallets of families they didn't recognize. Letters addressed in their handwriting, signed with names they'd never used. Whole rooms in their homes were now decorated in styles they hated, filled with books they'd never read, but remembered reading. The staircase wasn't taking you anywhere. It was bringing you back to a version of yourself that never existed, but should have. It was making you become the memory, and the town was slipping into it, slowly, relentlessly. One boy fell asleep in his backyard and woke up with dirt under his nails and a wedding ring on his finger. He was 11. He didn't know whose name was carved inside it, but he couldn't take it off. A woman, widowed for 20 years, woke up to find her husband in bed beside her, breathing shallowly, his body damp with sweat. She wept, called his name, touched his face. He smiled and whispered, "It's okay, I never left. You just forgot how to miss me." He died an hour later, again. And when she turned back to him, he was gone. Her pillow was soaked with black water. The town council, what remained of it, tried burning the staircase when it appeared in the middle of City Hall. They doused it with kerosene, lit it, watched it burn. And when the flames died out, the staircase was gone. But the stairs remained, 6 of them, floating midair, leading nowhere. But if you stared too long, you'd hear your own voice calling from beneath them, begging, apologizing, asking to come back. The people of Elmridge stopped trying to map the staircase, stopped measuring, because it didn't obey distance anymore. One man walked it for 20 minutes and ended up in his childhood home. Another took 2 steps and found himself face to face with his unborn daughter, who told him, "You didn't choose wrong. You just never chose at all." The staircase knew, because it had been built from things never acted on, regrets that weren't big enough to ruin a life, but just sharp enough to nick a soul, the almosts, the not quites, the truths you let pass like strangers, and each of them laid a step. The winding grew, not down, not up, but through who you were, through who you could have been, through the space between your memory and someone else's. And it always brought you to the same place, a door with no handle, no hinges, just a hole in the middle. And through that hole, you'd see yourself, watching, waiting, smiling like they already knew whether you'd try it again. Because the staircase doesn't end, it just loops. And every time you step on it, you forget a little more of who you were, and remember a little more of what the house needs you to be. It was no longer about where you went, or even what you remembered. By now, in Elmridge, it was about what remembered you. The house didn't just wait in one place anymore. It had spilled past its boundaries, past Ridgeway Hill, past the map's reach, past the skin of things. It had soaked into the walls, the soil, the town's breath. And when the first echo called someone's name before they spoke it, people stopped talking altogether. It began in the Holloway home. Their son, Wyatt, had been mute for years. Selectively, doctors had said, after what he witnessed during the early incidents. But that night, long after the sun had stopped bothering to rise or fall, Wyatt sat up in bed and said, clear as glass, "Someone's at the window." His mother turned. No one there. But the window pane was fogged from the outside. 2 handprints, small, pressed firmly, upside down, and then came the whisper, from the corner of the room, not loud, not threatening, just soft, familiar. It spoke Wyatt's name. Once, twice, then a pause, then again. The voice didn't belong to his parents. It didn't belong to anyone living. But Wyatt smiled. That was what broke his mother. Not the voice. Not the prince. Not even the whisper that began repeating her name next. It was her son's smile, like he'd been waiting to be called. He stood up, walked across the room, and stepped into the dark, not out the window, into the wall. And when she tore it open with clawed fingers and broken nails, she found no sheetrock, no beams, just black air and the sound of her own voice whispering things she hadn't said in years. Not aloud, not to anyone. Things only she had thought. And now something was repeating them back. The next day, other houses began to echo, but not like a cave, not like a scream bouncing back. These echoes anticipated. They said things before you did, before you thought them, before you admitted them. You'd sit on your couch, trying not to cry, and the silence would split just enough to breathe. He's not coming back. He never planned to. You'd pour coffee and hear, this won't help. You've already had 3. You'd bury your face in your hands and the room would murmur. You were the reason she stayed that night. No one was safe. Not even in their own heads. Because soon, the echoes didn't just haunt rooms. They followed you. Whispered through phones that weren't ringing, from television sets that weren't on, from the mouths of loved ones, mid-conversation. Not their voices, but yours, echoing back thoughts you hadn't yet formed. It wasn't possession. It was recognition. The Red House had studied you long enough. Now it knew you. It knew your cadence, your pauses, the rhythm of your breath before you sighed. It knew how your voice broke when you tried to be brave. And most of all, it knew which words would ruin you. Because the echoes weren't lies. They were too accurate to dismiss. That was the worst part. They were always true. Just not yet. It began causing accidents. Fractures in reality. Someone would hear their name whispered from behind and turn sharply, swearing someone was there. But in that moment of turning, they'd step into a space that wasn't finished yet. A hallway between moments. A crack between rooms. One man turned so fast his body folded backward. His arms reached into a room his house never had. He screamed, but the scream came after he vanished. And the hallway. Gone. Only a new echo remained in that house. One that repeated a simple, terrible sentence I thought he'd never leave. People tried drowning the echoes out. Played music. Kept TVs blaring static. Plugged their ears with wax, with blood, with cloth. But the echoes adapted. They moved to other senses. One woman tried to go deaf with intention, ruptured her own eardrums. But when she woke up in the hospital, every light blinked her name in Morse code. And the tiles, they were warm, breathing, murmuring truths through vibration. The Red House had learned sound was just one way in. Now it spoke through memory itself. It didn't need to hear you. It needed you to feel it. And then came the first full sentence. Spoken clearly. Not by an echo, not by a shadow, not by a room, but by the town itself. It happened at 3:13 a.m. Every window, every wall. Every speaker in Elmridge vibrated with the same words. You've told yourself you're still a good person. We'd like to show you why you're wrong. And then the air collapsed. That's the only way people could describe it. Like gravity folded inward. Like breath was suddenly too thick. Like reality itself inhaled. And then, just like that, a new house appeared. Not on Ridgeway, not in the shadows, inside other homes, whole structures. One family woke up to find an extra staircase in their foyer, with carpet worn and stained, pictures on the walls. Their pictures, but altered. The mother's face always just blurred enough to look like someone else. The son with 2 shadows behind him. The father with no eyes. The photos watched. Another man opened his bathroom and found a full living room inside. A TV played a scene. He didn't recognize, a party from a decade ago. But this time, He wasn't invited. He heard his name being mocked. He saw his wife laughing with someone else. But the worst part, he believed it. Because even if it hadn't happened that way, maybe it could have. And the red house fed on that uncertainty. It didn't just echo what had been. It echoed what almost was. The alternate truths. The things you feared others thought about you. The possibility that maybe you deserved this. And in the end, everyone began whispering too. Echoing each other. Mimicking. Because once you heard your truth spoken before you thought it, you were never sure if it was your thought at all, or just the house trying on your voice, to see how it fit, to see if, maybe, you were ready to echo back. It was never there before. Not in that room, not on that wall. It didn't match the house. Its frame was black iron, twisted like melted fingers, cool to the touch but humming like something alive was pulsing just beneath the surface. No reflection came at first, just darkness. A black slab that absorbed every ounce of light in the room. But if you stared long enough, if you were stupid or brave or broken enough to wait, the mirror began to unfold. Not physically. It didn't ripple or shift. It just changed. Like your eyes had stopped looking and your mind had started remembering without your permission. People thought it would show them what they had done. The sins they'd buried, the betrayals they'd denied, the regrets they'd swallowed. But the mirror didn't care about what you did. It showed you what you didn't. The first to speak about it was Devon Harlow, a high school teacher with a wife and a clean record. He found the mirror behind the linen closet, leaning against the wall like it had been waiting years to be discovered. It called to him, not with sound, but presence. Like gravity, like guilt. He stared into it for 13 minutes. When he came out, his face had aged 20 years. His hair had turned white, and he said only one thing before he locked himself in his basement and never spoke again. I should have stopped him. No one knew who he meant. But later that week, the mirror appeared again, this time in a diner restroom. The waitress who found it had once let her sister walk home alone. 15 years ago. That sister never came back. She'd told herself it was fate. That she couldn't have known. But the mirror showed her pausing by the door, seeing the look in her sister's eyes, hearing the hesitation in her voice. The opportunity to say, "I'll come with you." She didn't. And the mirror replayed it on loop, frame by frame, each time a little slower. Each time zoomed in closer on the moment where choice had existed, where possibility had bloomed for just a breath. She gouged her own eyes out within an hour. Because seeing the past wasn't the horror. Seeing the absence of action, that was the wound that wouldn't close. The mirrors spread like mold, no longer confined to bathrooms or closets. They began forming on the sides of cars, the glass of microwaves, puddles in the road after rain. And no matter where they appeared, they never showed your face, only the version of you that had chosen better. The friend who called, the parent who listened, the lover who left before the bruises came, the one who said no, the one who stayed. They looked like you, spoke like you. But in their world, the red house never came. In their world, Elmridge was whole. They were whole, and they never even knew your name. People became obsessed. Some shattered the mirrors. Others built altars to them, begging for second chances. One man chained a mirror to his chest, muttering through cracked teeth, "I'll earn him. I'll become him." But he only became hollow. Because the mirrors didn't offer redemption. They mocked it. Redemption is only real when the world still gives you time to change. And time had long since rotted away in Elmridge. Eventually, people stopped looking. They covered every glass surface, wore blindfolds, painted over puddles. But the mirrors adapted. They started appearing behind closed eyes, in dreams, in the backs of throats when people tried to scream. You'd cough up your reflection mid-sentence and watch it blink before melting into steam. One boy whispered that he could see his better self in his tears. He won't look at me anymore. That's when the red house reached through. Not physically, not even mentally, emotionally. It used the mirrors, turned them into ports of emotion that didn't belong to you. A woman grieving her lost child woke up with the grief of 100 mothers she never met. A man with no children began weeping for a daughter who didn't exist. Except she did, in the mirror, sitting on his lap, calling him dad with eyes full of trust. The mirrors weren't showing you what might have been. They were infecting you with what never was, and you felt it as real. The joy, the guilt, the devastation. Because the house had discovered a deeper hunger, not for truth, not for regret, but for envy. It didn't just want you to hurt. It wanted you to know how happy you could have been. To taste it, touch it, lose it all over again, without ever truly having had it. The red house wasn't torturing you anymore. It was seducing you, whispering, "This could have been yours. It still can be." And then it would give you a choice. One more look, one more version, one more door. But each time you chose to look again, it remembered a little more of you, and forgot a little more of them. Until one day, you were the reflection, trapped, perfect, smiling, and someone else, someone broken, stood on the other side of the mirror, staring at you, wishing, wanting, ready to give up everything just to switch places. And the mirror, it fogged over, then cleared, and the red house smiled from both sides, because the reflection didn't matter anymore, only the desire to escape, and the truth that you never would. The window didn't belong there, not in that wall, not on that side of the house. It was too tall, too narrow, its frame too black, as if it had been scorched into the plaster rather than installed. The glass had no reflection, no sky, no trees, not even the flicker of the room it faced. Just a slow, pulsing fog, like breath behind frosted glass. But if you waited long enough, if you stood still and watched like the house wanted you to, the fog would begin to clear. Not all at once. Not fast. It lifted the way a lid lifts off a coffin. Hesitantly, with the knowledge that what's beneath shouldn't be disturbed. The first to see through it was Lenny Dolan, a retired mailman whose house had sat untouched by the worst of the spreading phenomena until that morning. He woke to find the window glowing faintly, its light more emotional than visual. Something in his gut told him it was dawn on the other side. Even though his clocks were dead and the sun hadn't risen in a week, he stood in front of it for hours. Didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. When his neighbor found him, he was still there. Eyes open, mouth stitched shut with something that looked like hair. Fingertips pressed so hard into the glass they had begun to bleed. His body was locked in place, rigid, trembling. And his eyes, they weren't looking through the window anymore. They were looking back. Because the thing on the other side wasn't a view. It was watching. But it wasn't watching him. That was the part no one understood until it was too late. The window didn't show your past, or your future. It didn't show your memories, your lies, or your regrets like the other parts of the house did. The window showed you something else's present. Somewhere, far beneath the skin of reality. Beneath the layers of walls and whispers and guilt, rot corridors, something else lived. Something that didn't move through time the way we do. Something with its own version of dawn and dusk. Something that had never seen a human face until now, and was utterly fascinated. After Lenny, the window started appearing in other places. Not just in homes, but in objects. In the sheen of a kettle. In the frost on your windshield. In the surface of a dead phone screen. And always, it started the same way. Fogged, breathing, waiting. Some resisted the urge to look. Most didn't, because there was something deeply compelling about it. Not seductive, not manipulative. Curious. Like a question you didn't remember being asked. One that lived just below language, waiting to be answered with your attention. And once you looked through it, the window began to open from the other side. What people saw varied. Some saw corridors that seemed to be alive, shifting like muscle. Others saw forests made of bone, white trees that bent toward the ground, weeping fluid that sizzled when it touched the dirt. One man saw a room made entirely of mouths, some whispering, some screaming, some biting into nothing, over and over. But one thing remained constant. You could always see yourself standing somewhere in that world, not doing anything, just there, far off, still, watching the window back, and slowly walking toward it. The psychological collapse was immediate and violent. One woman tore her eyes out and screamed that her other self had finally blinked. Another carved a circle into the center of her own forehead, whispering, "I need to see both sides now." But the worst were those who said nothing. The ones who stood for hours before the window, long after the fog had cleared. Those were the ones who began changing. They spoke less, slept less, smiled too often. Their bodies didn't decay, but their behavior did. They would show up at work or walk their dogs or buy milk. But their timing was off. They blinked at the wrong pace, laughed a half second too late. They'd say something that you were thinking before you spoke. They'd call you by your middle name even if you never told them. And they'd ask one strange question again and again: do you know what version you are? It wasn't rhetorical. They meant it. They were trying to figure it out. Because by then, the town realized something bone, deep and awful. The window wasn't a portal. It was a mirror. Not one that reflected back, but one that looked out from somewhere deeper. Somewhere where versions of you wandered, born from every abandoned decision, every unspoken desire, every moment you almost became something else. And now those versions wanted in. Not to hurt you, to replace you. Because the red house wasn't satisfied showing you pain anymore. It wanted you to understand what it meant to be disposable. That's somewhere else, in a reality built from all your unmet potential. There's a better you, and they've been watching you waste it, and now they want their life back. So the window watches, and if you stand in front of it long enough, if you give it just one more look, you'll see your reflection tilt its head slightly. Smile, and raise a hand to knock on your side. And when you blink, you're the one behind the glass. It didn't start loud. Nothing ever did in Elmbridge anymore. Not the disappearing people, not the moving staircases, not the doors that opened backward into things that breathed like rooms. This time it was a whisper. Small, harmless, soft enough to mistake for your own thoughts. That's how it got in. That's how it always got in. It crawled in quietly. A tickle behind the ear. A faint breath down your neck while you stood alone in your living room. Or a single word spoken from inside your mouth while you swore you hadn't said anything. At first, it said your name. That was all. Just your name, but not the way others said it. Not even the way you said it to yourself. The whisper said it like it owned it. Like it had written it somewhere dark a very long time ago, and was now reclaiming its creation. People who heard it would look around confused, checking doors, peeking through peepholes. No one was ever there, but the sound followed them. Into their beds, into their dreams, into their bones. The whisper didn't want you to listen. It wanted you to agree. Because the more it said your name, the more you began answering it without realizing. Someone would ask, "Are you all right?" And you'd nod even if your stomach was full of glass. Someone would ask, "Did you hear that?" And you'd say no, even though the whisper had been repeating itself for hours. It was training you, teaching you silence, until you stopped reacting at all. That's when the itching started. Behind the neck first, then the back, then in places fingertips couldn't reach, like your ribs, the soles of your feet, the creases behind your eyes. It was constant, impossible to scratch, because it wasn't on your skin. It was underneath. Doctors, those who hadn't fled Elmbridge, called it psychogenic pruritus, a stress response, a town-wide delusion. But it spread too fast, too specific. And then they found the markings, carved in perfect circles, thin, red. Always 12 lines, arranged like a clock, but there were no numbers, only letters, always the same ones, spelling silly NCEME. It wasn't a rash, it was a brand. And it pulsed every time the whisper spoke. A woman named Judith tried cutting it out. She didn't want to hear it anymore. Didn't want to feel the twitch beneath her shoulder blade where the whisper laughed. But when she sliced through the skin, it didn't bleed, it whispered, from the wound, from the muscle, from the bone. Her blood was ink black and moved too slowly, and the only thing she said before collapsing was, "I'm not the one thinking anymore." Her eyes never closed. They blinked in rhythm, 12 times, like clockwork. After that, people stopped trying to fight it. They tried ignoring it. They wore headphones, blasted music, plugged their ears with candle wax, but it didn't matter. The whisper wasn't in your ears. It was in your choices. It lived in every moment you hesitated. Every time you didn't speak up when you should have. Every time you stayed quiet when you could have said something. To a friend, a stranger, a dying family member. That's what it fed on. The empty space where your voice should have been. It loved when you said nothing. When you let them walk out the door. When you deleted the message instead of sending it. When you told yourself, it's too late to say anything now. And when the whisper knew you were ready, it changed. It stopped saying your name, and started saying things you never told anyone. You wanted him dead, didn't you? You knew she was hurting and still turned away. You never cried at the funeral. It spoke them with your mouth, while you slept, or thought you did. Neighbors began reporting hearing people talking to themselves at night. Long, one-sided arguments, weeping, begging. But when questioned, the people in question had no memory of making a sound. They weren't being haunted. They were being ventriloquized. The red house wasn't possessing them. It was narrating them, writing their guilt into speech, until the voice became theirs. And then they started whispering too, not as themselves, but as conduits, walking through town, saying nothing all day. Then, at night, standing outside someone else's home and whispering all the things they hadn't said, repeating them over and over, until a door opened, until someone let them in, not physically, emotionally, because the moment you accepted the whisper as yours, it moved in, and then you forgot what was yours. You couldn't tell which guilt was yours and which was someone else's. You couldn't tell which secrets were yours and which you'd inherited from 100 other mouths. The town became a network of hushed voices, looping shame between houses, weaving silence like thread between souls. Until no one knew who said what anymore. Until everyone was just repeating everything no one ever dared say. That's how the Red House grew its language. It didn't build sentences. It built regret into syntax. It built shame into dialect. It built your silence into fluency. And when you finally whispered it back, when you echoed something awful you hadn't known you were carrying, a crack formed in your throat. Not metaphorically, a physical, thin, red crack, and from it leaked a sound that wasn't yours, but sounded perfectly familiar, because the whisper, it wasn't trying to hurt you, it was trying to become you. And by the time you noticed the itch was gone, it had already taken your place in every conversation, and it never stumbled, it never cried, it never stuttered over apologies, it just smiled and kept talking. No one built it. No blueprint ever showed it. No one remembered it being there yesterday. And yet, on a fog, heavy morning that felt more like a memory than a day, the room appeared, wedged between two second-floor bedrooms in the Marston house like a secret swelling in the walls. At first glance, it looked normal, dusty, old, unlived. But it was the kind of normal that didn't make sense, the kind that felt staged. Like someone trying very hard to pretend they had a childhood here. There were toys in the corner that no one owned. A rocking chair that creaked even when no one was near it. Wallpaper peeled in slow strips like it was unlearning its pattern. A wooden mobile spun lazily from the ceiling fan, dangling stars with too many points and a moon that blinked when you weren't looking. It shouldn't have been there. But when Mrs. Marston stepped inside, she stopped. Her breath hitched. Her knees buckled. She said one word before fainting cold on the floor: Anna. The problem? Mrs. Marston never had a daughter. But that room did. That room remembered Anna. The family thought it was a breakdown. Stress from the town's growing rot. They boarded the door, told themselves it was nothing. But then the toys started moving. Not all at once. Not even regularly. Just enough to remind them that forgetting doesn't make something not real. Just enough to let them know the room remembers even when you don't. At night, faint lullabies hummed from behind the boarded door. And then came the photos. Polaroids scattered across the Marstons' hallway floor. Yellowed and scratched, but clear enough to show a little girl playing in that room, sitting on that bed, hugging Mrs. Marston, who was smiling, laughing, loving. Her husband demanded answers. She had none, until she started dreaming of braiding tiny hands, of wiping scraped knees, of singing "You Are My Sunshine" to a face that always turned away before the dream ended. I must have lost her, she whispered once, tears on her lips. But how do you forget your own child? The town never answered, because soon other rooms started appearing. Across Elmridge, new doors opened into old truths, in basements, closets, hallways that had never been long enough to contain them. Rooms came back, not new rooms. Remembered rooms. One man found a study full of journals in his handwriting. Entries about a brother he didn't have. Pages upon pages describing years of inside jokes, pranks, arguments, heartbreak. He couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop knowing. And when he finally dared to speak the name written in every entry, Simon, the books all caught fire in his hands, and the flames whispered, "You let him drown." The rooms were not haunting people with things they had done. They were bringing back pieces that had been taken, stolen, hidden by the house, not because those memories were too painful, but because they were useful, because forgetting is a kind of erasure, and erasure leaves space. And that space, the red house was filling it. With its own version, a new memory would bloom each night. Subtle at first, you'd suddenly know how to whistle, even if you never learned. You'd hum a tune you couldn't name, but your bones ached with nostalgia for it. You'd speak a name in your sleep, then wake to find a note written in your own handwriting, "Don't forget her again." The worst part wasn't realizing the memories weren't real. The worst part was wanting them to be. They came complete, rich, weighted with love, pain, years. People missed children they never had, mourned lovers they never met, clutched jewelry that hadn't existed the day before, but now felt like family heirlooms. And in each of these newly remembered rooms, there was always one item left behind. A trinket, a letter, a sound, something that should have proven it wasn't real, but didn't, because the object wasn't theirs. It was yours. It belonged to you the moment you picked it up. You just hadn't remembered that until now. That's what the Red House had discovered next. Pain was effective. Fear was addictive. But nostalgia, false nostalgia, was a sedative. It lulled you into loving what had never existed. It whispered, "Maybe you're better in this version." People started living in their remembered rooms. They'd abandon the rest of their homes, sleep on old beds with newer scars, eat at tables they never bought, talk to toys or dolls, or silence, because the silence talked back, and when neighbors tried to pull them out, they'd scream, cry, beg, "Don't take this from me again. She was mine. I remember her laugh. If it wasn't real, why does it hurt like this?" But the answer was simple, because the Red House wanted it too. It wanted to overwrite, to build new truths out of borrowed yearning, to bury reality beneath thick blankets of almost. And the more rooms appeared, the more people forgot what was real in the first place. The town's history twisted. Events swapped dates, faces blurred. Death certificates listed names no one had ever heard, but still made people weep. Entire families emerged from fogged-up picture frames and walked down Main Street as if they'd always been here. And maybe they had. Maybe we'd just forgotten. Because the red house didn't erase like fire. It erased like time, quietly, relentlessly, with enough tenderness to make you thank it for the lie. And the moment you accepted that room as your own, you never left it again. Not really. Even if your body walked out the door, your soul stayed curled on that remembered bed, whispering a lullaby you didn't know you knew, humming it until the wallpaper bled, until the stars on the mobile stopped spinning, until the room sighed contentedly, and began waiting for someone else to remember too. It didn't start in a basement. It didn't start in an attic. It started in the middle of the hallway. No trapdoor, no sign, just a soft, aching groan one night beneath the floorboards. And then, by morning, there it was 13 steps descending into a place that hadn't existed the day before. The Bannister family was the first to find it, or rather, the first to admit they had. A staircase, right beneath the spot where their hallway runner curled up each night like it knew what was coming. Their youngest son, Clay, was the one who opened it. He didn't scream. He didn't call out. He just stared down into the dark and said, "It smells like before." No one knew what he meant. Not then. But they would. Because the staircase wasn't built of wood or stone. It was built of moments. Each step had a weight to it, not from gravity, but from regret. With each footfall, it got heavier. The air thickened with memory. The smell of old perfume, the sound of doors slamming years ago, the crunch of birthday candles being blown out in a room that no longer existed. Every step wasn't just a descent. It was a return, not to a place, to a feeling. Clay was the first to vanish. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just kept walking until he was swallowed by the hush that waited at the bottom. His parents followed minutes later. They didn't want to go. Not really. But when the house whispered, "He's only 3 steps behind the night you still loved each other," they couldn't stop themselves. By noon, the staircase was gone, but it reappeared elsewhere, in different homes, different styles, sometimes stone, cracked and mossy, sometimes smooth metal, like it belonged in a bunker, always 13 steps, always down, and always lined with voices, not shouting, not taunting, familiar, the voices of people you hadn't heard in years, dead friends, old teachers, lovers you'd failed, children you'd never met. One man claimed he heard his own voice calling to him from the bottom, saying, "This is the only place you didn't ruin." That was enough to pull him in. People described the descent differently. For some, it was a rush, like falling backward into a dream where everything almost made sense again. For others, it was agony, because the deeper you went, the more you remembered what you tried to bury. Every cruel word, every selfish choice, every fork in the road where you turned left just to spite yourself. But the staircase didn't punish you for it. No. It offered you a chance. At the bottom, there was always a room, small, unfurnished, still, and in the center of that room stood a door, and that door, people said, didn't open outward. It opened inward, into you. And what you found on the other side was the moment you most wanted to undo. Some said they saw a funeral and had the chance to scream, to beg, to tell her not to go. Some stood in classrooms and finally raised their hands. Others relived the quiet betrayal of doing nothing when action mattered most. And in that moment, with hands shaking and hearts ripping open, they were given the illusion of choice, the chance to change it. And they did. They screamed. They stayed. They said, "I love you." They turned back. And for one breathless instant, they believed it had worked. But when they stepped through the door again, back into the real world, nothing had changed. Not out here, but inside. Something was off. They no longer remembered why they loved the people they lived with. They no longer cried at old songs. Laughter came too easily, too hollow. Memories they once carried in vivid, scarred detail were suddenly clean. Scrubbed, but not in a healing way, in a surgical way. The staircase hadn't given them a chance to fix the past. It had cut out the pain, and taken the rest with it. Because emotion doesn't live in the facts. It lives in the wounds. And the red house had learned how to harvest them. Every time someone descended that staircase, a piece of them didn't come back. Their anger, their longing, their drive, they returned empty, productive, compliant, polite, perfectly numb, like mannequins dressed in the memory of who they used to be. And that's when the staircases started appearing in public, in parks, in schools, in City Hall. People lined up to descend, to get closure. They called it, to fix what haunts me. But those who came back no longer cared enough to tell the rest of us what they saw. They didn't resist the red house anymore. They didn't fear it. They thanked it. Because the red house understood something we never wanted to admit, that most people don't want healing. They want forgetting. They want a version of themselves that doesn't wake up at 3 a.m. racked with guilt. They want silence where the pain used to scream, and the house gave it to them for a price. Because with every descent, the staircase took something real and gave back something hollow. A sculpture shaped like peace, a memory without edge, a heart that couldn't break, but also couldn't love. And the people of Elmridge, they lined up for it. Because once you know there's a way back to the moment that broke you, you'll walk those 13 steps, even if it means you never feel whole again, even if it means you leave the real you behind at the bottom. Still waiting, still hurting, still real. It didn't tick. It throbbed. The clock appeared overnight on the wall of the town library, nestled between the faded portraits of Elmridge's founders. At first glance, it looked ordinary, round, wooden, a bit chipped at the edges. But when the morning light hit it, the hands began to move the wrong way. Not fast, not in a panic, calm, intentional. Second by second, minute by minute, it rewound. The librarian, Miss Weller, was the first to notice, but not because of the clock itself. She noticed because she spilled her coffee, and it unsplashed. It rose from the floor, the brown stain reversing back into her mug, steam reappearing. Her sleeves drying as if the spill had never happened. And in that brief flicker of time's rebellion, she felt it a memory return, one she'd buried deep beneath years of silence. The night her father left, the sound of the back door, the words she never said, the hug she didn't give. It came flooding back, not as a dream, but as a presence, as if it had happened seconds ago, as if the clock had dragged it back. She tried to leave, but the doors wouldn't open, not because they were locked, because they hadn't been opened yet, because the time on the clock read 7:12 a.m., and she had entered the building at 7:15. The red house had turned the room into a loop of unarrival. Soon after, the library became a prison of memory. Books reordered themselves onto shelves you hadn't touched in decades. Names you hadn't heard since childhood whispered from between pages. Visitors who stayed too long began to notice odd shifts. Paper yellowing, then unyellowing. Ink drying, then dripping backward into pens. Conversations unspoken. Footsteps echoing in reverse. Laughter pulling back into lungs before it was ever shared. But the worst part, you didn't notice it happening until you remembered something you had already forgotten. You'd feel it like a headache from a different lifetime, a sudden, painful rush of context. One woman came in to read a newspaper and collapsed the moment she touched it, because she remembered that she had come here to read about her sister's death 22 years ago. Only the paper now had no obituary, because the sister hadn't died yet, because the clock wouldn't let her. The countdown had begun, but no one knew what it was counting down to. You'd think a clock counting backward would end at 0, but this one never reached it, because time didn't collapse into nothing. It unraveled into again. People started coming to the library on purpose. They'd sit beneath the clock, whispering apologies to no one. They'd hold photos and weep when the faces in them smiled again, just for a second, before fading back into stillness. Some tried to leave the moment the hands moved too close to something they couldn't face. Others waited for it, prayed for it, begged time to give them one more chance. But the clock didn't offer chances. It offered consequences. Every time it rewound, something followed. Not footsteps, not voices, feelings. Thick, cloying emotions that didn't belong to you. Regret that wasn't yours. Sorrow from another lifetime. Fury from a fight you never had. You'd sit in a corner and feel a grief so sharp it cut your breath in half, and only later realize the man across the room was reliving the day he didn't stop his son from getting in the car. The library became heavy with recycled pain, like air too old to breathe. The windows fogged not from heat, but from remembrance. Some rooms aged in reverse, dust unformed itself, lights blinked backward. One hallway rewound so far it showed its original brickwork from when the building was a courthouse in 1901, and people were still in it, people from then, blending with now. Confused, overlapping, stuttering through timelines that didn't want to hold them anymore. One of them, a child in lace boots, walked up to a modern librarian and whispered, "I think I forgot how to die." And the clock, it ticked on, backward, steadily, refusing to stop. The more it reversed, the more the present fractured. Streetlights in Elmridge began flickering in patterns they hadn't used since the 80s. Old radio signals interrupted smartphones. A woman tried to call her husband and got patched into a conversation from 1962 between two people who were still alive and still hiding. The Red House wasn't just tampering with memory now. It was rewriting history. But not to correct it, to trap it, to lock every mistake on repeat, every choice on an endless spool of almost. It wanted the town to be a museum of decisions, each day looping into itself like a Mobius strip soaked in guilt. And the people, they started counting, not seconds, not minutes, regrets. "I'm on my 12th, one woman whispered. That's when the clock showed me the day I lied about the fire. "I'm on my 23rd, a man muttered, sweating. I hit her and I laughed. I don't remember laughing, but the clock does. They began marking their regrets on the library walls, tally marks at first, then full sentences, then stories, pages taped to the brick, confessions so detailed they read like prayers, until the walls were full, until there was no more space, and the people stopped writing, because it wasn't about remembering anymore. It was about not forgetting again. The clock didn't forgive. It didn't judge. It just counted. And when you stared at it too long, when the hands pulled closer to some echo you couldn't bear to relive, it whispered in a voice that wasn't spoken, but felt it's not too late to hurt again, because the Red House had stopped showing you your worst days. Now, it let you relive them. And if you were broken enough to beg for that, then you deserved to stay in them. Forever. It stood there, in the middle of a field that used to be a playground, perfectly upright. A black wooden door with a brass handle, no frame, no hinges, just a door, standing on its own, refusing to fall, refusing to age. No one saw it appear. One day it was empty grass and broken swings. The next, the door was just there. At first, people thought it was an art piece. Someone even joked about taking pictures for a calendar titled Elmridge's Weirdest Week Yet. But the laughter didn't last long, because within hours, the door started knocking. Not loud, just a slow, hollow knock from the other side. Always in threes. Always when no one was touching it. The first person to reach for the handle was a teenager named Matty Ellis. He placed his hand on the brass, and the world around him seemed to pause, like air taking a breath it never meant to hold. His eyes rolled back. Blood trickled from his nose, and then he whispered something in a voice that wasn't his, "Don't open it from here." After that, he ran, screaming, gone for 2 days. When they found him huddled under a bridge with his fingernails torn off, and his lips, stitched shut with grass, he just kept shaking his head and repeating the same 4 words, "It's not a door." But it was. It was shaped like a door, felt like a door. The handle turned, the wood creaked, people knocked back, and it always knocked again, sometimes immediately, sometimes hours later, sometimes when no one was near. People began to report dreams of the door, not dreams about the door, from the door. Visions where they were trapped inside a space they couldn't describe, not dark, not empty, just hollow. Like the air had forgotten what it meant to be touched. They'd wake up sweating, whispering things they didn't remember, learning equations, old hymns, coordinates for places that didn't exist. One man carved a phrase into his chest with a fork before falling into a coma, open inward, not out. The door was waiting for the right person, not to enter, to invite in, and soon it found her, Mary Trent. She hadn't spoken since her son died in the fire 3 years ago. Lived alone. Walked the fields every morning. Locals said she barely made eye contact. But one cold afternoon she stood in front of the door for 6 hours. No movement, no sound. Then, just before sunset, she smiled. The kind of smile that's shaped more by memory than joy. And she knocked once. The door swung open. Only she didn't go in. She stepped aside. And something stepped out. No one saw it. Not clearly. Just a blur. A suggestion of movement. A weight in the air that made birds fall silent and wind stop short. After that, Mary began speaking again. Perfectly. Too perfectly. No stutters. No pauses. Words came like rehearsed lines from a script she never wrote. She said she was fine. Said she was happy. Said she forgave the world. But when someone called her by her name, she'd pause for half a second too long. Like she had to remember it wasn't hers. The door, now closed, stayed upright in the field. But it changed. Sometimes it was taller. Sometimes the wood was wet. Sometimes the brass was green and flaking like it had been underwater for decades. And sometimes the knock came from both sides at once. After Mary, others tried opening it. Some knocked gently, some screamed. Some brought candles, offerings, blood. The door never opened again. But those who touched it, really touched it, started hearing whispers in the corners of their homes. Not voices, instructions. Subtle nudges. Don't answer that call. Turn left at the next light. Leave the window open tonight. Little things. Small enough to follow without question, but each choice had consequences. The man who left his window open found his daughter missing the next morning. Replaced by a girl who looked the same but didn't blink. The woman who ignored the call was later told it was from her sister, just before she jumped in front of a train. The door didn't grant wishes. It rewrote timelines, twisted them, braided them into something else, and waited for the fray. The field became a place no one entered, not for fear, for temptation. Because the door promised something no one could resist, a version of life where the thing you lost never slipped through your fingers. A version where they stayed, where they forgave you, where they never burned or bled or broke. But you could only access that world if you weren't the one who opened the door. Because the key was never on this side. The key was grief, the kind so deep it knocked back, and once you let it in, you'd walk away smiling, whole, hollow, and whoever you used to be was locked behind the door, still knocking, still begging, still remembering a life that no longer belonged to them. At first, it sounded like coincidence, a strange fluke of acoustics, a voice that mimicked yours half a second too late. When it started, people laughed it off. Bad cell reception, weird acoustics, echoes bouncing off the canyon. But Elmridge didn't have canyons, and this echo didn't fade, it followed. It started in the town square, just after dusk, with a boy named Julian who was known for talking too much. He was telling a story to his friends when it happened. Every word he said was repeated, perfectly, but not from where he stood. It came from behind him, not in a whisper but in his voice, slightly wrong, like it was being remembered, not spoken. He turned around. Nothing. Just trees. And still, the echo kept going, word for word, syllable by syllable, after he'd already stopped talking. He panicked, told everyone to shut up, but the echo didn't stop. It kept going. And then it said something he never did: "They'll find you in the roots." After that, Julian went quiet. Completely. For days, he wouldn't speak. Not even to his parents. Not because he couldn't, but because he was terrified of what might say it back. And then others started hearing it. The echo was selective. It didn't follow everyone. Only those who carried secrets. Not the kind you whisper in confession booths, but the ones that grow like mold in your ribs. Shame you never admitted. Desires you buried. Decisions you told yourself were justified when they weren't. It clung to those truths like scent to smoke. People began noticing that the echo wasn't bound to time. It could repeat words they hadn't said yet. Sometimes, while brushing their teeth, or waiting at red lights, they'd hear themselves say something out loud, and seconds later, the same phrase would crawl back into their ears from nowhere. Only when it came back, it was different. Slightly slower, colder, detached, like it had stopped caring about what it once meant. Some tried speaking in empty houses to test it, whispering lies just to see what came back. But the echo didn't like games. If you lied, it answered with the truth. A woman told herself, "I don't regret what I did." The echo returned, "You dream of her scream every night." A man whispered, "I never wanted to hurt anyone." The echo said, "You smiled when he begged you to stop." The echo didn't reflect your words. It reflected your intentions. And Elmridge was full of rot beneath the surface. Soon, people couldn't be sure which version of themselves was real, the one that spoke or the one that echoed. One boy, Connor, recorded himself reading bedtime stories to see if the echo would follow. On the third night, the audio recorder picked up his voice reading Goodnight Moon, but after the last page, it kept going. For 4 minutes, the echo kept speaking. Not a story, a memory. "I know where you buried her. I know the weight of her in your arms. I know you kissed her forehead after you made her stop breathing." Connor disappeared the next day. No one searched the woods, because when a search party gathered near the tree line, they all heard it at once. Dozens of versions of their own voices coming from inside the forest, calling out names they hadn't spoken in years, begging forgiveness for things they hadn't told anyone. One woman dropped to her knees, sobbing, whispering, "I thought it was just a miscarriage." The echo replied, "You drank to make sure." That's when they stopped searching, because the forest wasn't empty. It was full of echoes, layered, stacked, spiraling over each other like a choir of truths no one wanted to hear. And the deeper you went, the more your own voice turned against you. Not just echoing, accusing. People started avoiding conversations altogether, fearful that anything they said would come back twisted. Children stopped speaking above whispers. Couples began sleeping in different rooms. Therapists left town. Churches were filled with the sound of quiet weeping from people too scared to pray aloud. The Red House had found a new way in. It didn't knock. It listened. And when it repeated you, it changed you. Because once you heard your own voice say the thing you could never admit, it became real. No longer a thought. No longer a guilt you could bury under chores and fake smiles. It lived now. It breathed through your own mouth. Some tried silencing themselves, sewing lips shut, ripping out vocal cords, living in total silence. But the echo didn't need sound. It only needed the memory of what you meant to say. And when that's all it has, it guesses. And its guesses are always right. Soon, people began hearing echoes before they spoke, being corrected by themselves in advance. A man reached for his wife's hand, and before he said a word, the echo hissed, "You don't mean it." He pulled away, she cried. The town quieted, fell still, a ghost town in everything but name. And every so often, a child would scream in the night, not from nightmares, but because their own whisper had said something they'd never heard before, "I am what you become." And outside their windows, the air would move. No wind, no breath, just the shape of something listening and smiling, because the red house didn't want to speak anymore. Now, it wanted you to hear yourself say the one thing you swore you never would. And then it wanted you to believe it. It was first discovered in the back room of Rosen's Antiques, tucked behind a stack of old dresser drawers and a headless mannequin. No one remembered it arriving. There were no invoices, no deliveries, no records of purchase. One day, it was just there. A tall, arched mirror framed in flaking silver, its glass fogged at the edges like it had caught the breath of something no longer living. Mr. Rosen tried to sell it at first, 40, marked down to 25 by the end of the week, but no one would take it. Not because of the price, because of what it showed. At first glance, it reflected just fine. Your face, your body, the room around you. But wait long enough, just a breath longer than you normally would, and something shifted. Not in the background, not in the mirror, in you. Your reflection's eyes held on a little too long, blinked a second too late, smiled when you didn't. Every movement lagged by a sliver, but just enough to make your heart pick up speed. And then it spoke, not out loud, never audibly, but you heard it, inside your head. Words from your own mouth, shaped by your own tongue, delivered by the person who looked exactly like you. Except they weren't you. Not anymore. The first woman who stared too long was found sitting cross-legged on the floor of the shop, laughing to herself, blood on her fingertips, her mouth stained black with ink. She kept pointing at the mirror and saying, "She showed me what I was supposed to be. I failed her. I failed me." Rosen moved the mirror to the back, covered it with a tarp. That worked for 2 days. Until the tarp caught fire, spontaneously, in a room with no open flame. The mirror was untouched, and waiting. They tried moving it. 4 men carried it out into the alley and left it for trash. But by morning, it was back inside. No signs of entry, no broken windows. Just standing in the middle of the shop floor again, angled perfectly toward the front door. And that's when the accident started. Not gruesome, not at first. Minor cuts, slips, a broken toe, a cracked rib. But the strange part wasn't the injuries. It was the expressions on the victims' faces. Always the same recognition. As if they saw something just before they were hurt. As if they understood what was coming and accepted it. Because the mirror didn't show your future. It showed your inevitable. People started sneaking into Rosen's after hours. Desperate souls. People carrying regret like a sickness. One man wrote in a notebook that he saw a version of himself where he had never left his daughter. She was 6 years old in the reflection, wearing butterfly clips and holding a drawing of their family. He reached for the glass and came away with bleeding fingertips and a sudden memory of what her voice should have sounded like. The mirror didn't give you visions. It restored what the red house had taken. One man saw his reflection hugging his brother, the same brother whose death he had repressed for decades. Another saw a version of herself who never made the deal with the town official, the deal that saved her business but damned her conscience. She stayed in front of the mirror for 9 hours, until she passed out from dehydration, whispering over and over, "I still love her. I still love her. I still love her." But it wasn't all grief. The mirror wasn't just a punishment. It was a test. It showed you the self you could have been if you had made even one different choice. The truer you, the better you, or sometimes the worse you. Because some people came back from the mirror changed in darker ways. A boy named Evans stared for 5 minutes and returned home a stranger. His family claimed he no longer blinked, that he didn't eat, that he began locking his door at night, not to keep others out, but to keep something in. He started muttering phrases in a language no one recognized, carving marks into his desk that looked like hands opening from the inside. And then, one night, he was gone. Not missing, just absent. The mirror never showed him again. And that's when they realized the longer you stared, the thinner the line became between you and your reflection. And if you stared too long, you switched. The reflection stepped out, and you became the one behind the glass. People stopped visiting Rosen's. The shop was shuttered, chained, boarded, condemned after an unexplained gas leak that never actually occurred. But late at night, passing by on Oakwood Street, some claimed they could still see the mirror in the window. Angled perfectly, catching moonlight it shouldn't. And if you looked at it, even just for a second, you'd feel something stir behind your eyes. A version of yourself. One with answers. One with no shame. One that remembered every awful thing you've done, every moment you twisted truth into survival, and wore it all like a crown. Not with guilt, but with pride. And if that version ever found a crack, a flicker of weakness, a second of envy, it would trade places in a heartbeat, because the Red House didn't want to torment you. Not anymore. Now it wanted to perfect you. To build a version of you that didn't break down or cry or beg for forgiveness. To sculpt a you that could survive what was coming. And if it had to steal your reflection to do it, so be it. After all, you weren't using it properly. The terror didn't begin with screams or blood. It began with mild confusion. A coffee table not where it was left the night before. A doorframe half an inch too narrow. Light switches reversed. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make people pause. Blame themselves. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I forgot. It was easy to dismiss at first. Until it happened to enough people in the same week. Until someone woke up in their neighbor's bedroom, 2 blocks away, wearing someone else's pajamas and clutching a photo of a family they didn't recognize. That's when it became impossible to ignore. The rooms were moving, not just changing decor or rearranging themselves. Entire sections of houses were being swapped, seamlessly, without warning, without noise. Bedrooms traded for attics, living rooms for basements, walls altered, dimensions skewed. A kitchen that once opened to a hallway now led directly into a stranger's den. People would wake in rooms that weren't their own but felt like theirs. Their toothbrush in the right cup, but their slippers by the door. But the smell of the air was wrong. The dust settled differently. The shadows didn't fall where they used to. And worst of all, sometimes the room brought a memory with it, a memory that wasn't yours. One woman sat on her new porch, except it wasn't hers, and wept for an hour, mourning the death of a child she never had. She remembered his name, what he looked like, the way he laughed with a gap between his teeth. But when she tried to recall her real family, their faces were gone. A man woke in a room filled with watercolor paintings of a beach town he'd never been to. Yet he could feel the sand between his toes, hear the laughter of friends whose names burned the back of his tongue. That morning, he called his mother to ask if they'd ever lived in Maine. She cried and hung up. It wasn't just space being altered, it was identity. The Red House had changed tactics again, no longer testing what you feared. Now it was dismantling who you were. Sleep became dangerous. People tried staying awake for days, terrified of what they'd find when they closed their eyes. But sleep always came, and when it did, you didn't dream, you relocated. Sometimes the shifts were minor. You'd wake up and find your closet now faced north. The floor creaked on a different board. Your window showed a yard you didn't own. But the more you tried to map the changes, the worse they became. A woman pinned her hand to a wall with a kitchen knife, convinced that would stop it from moving again. She awoke in a padded room, hand whole. Knife gone, walls scribbled with symbols she insisted she didn't write, until she began reciting them like prayers. A teenager built a trap, fishing wire along the walls, pressure sensors under the bed. He documented every inch of his room before sleeping. The next morning, the trap was untouched, but the room was gone. It had been replaced with a replica of his father's study. exact down to the smell of his cigars and the yellowing bloodstain on the rug. His father had died in that room. He'd seen it happen. That boy didn't speak again. People began chaining themselves to familiar spaces, memorizing every corner, counting steps between doors. Some even tattooed layouts on their bodies, as if knowledge could anchor them. But knowledge was the first thing the Red House took, because the rooms weren't just switching. They were learning, adjusting, adapting, sensing with your weakest memories, your most fragile moments. One man woke in a room where the wallpaper was made of apology letters he never sent. Another found his childhood bedroom exactly as it had been the night his sister disappeared. The sheets still damp from tears he didn't remember crying. The rooms were turning into evidence of who you could have been, of who you failed to be. One man tried burning his entire house down to stop it. He was found standing in the ashes, unburnt, surrounded by rooms from other people's lives. None of them his, all of them wrong. And in every one of them, etched faintly into the wall behind the light switch, were the same 4 words, "Do you remember yet?" Because that was the point. The Red House didn't want you to fear the dark anymore. It wanted you to fear yourself. The version of you that forgot. The version that survived when others didn't. The version that chose comfort over truth, silence over confession. It used your spaces, your sacred, ordinary, safe spaces, to show you how thin your grasp on reality had become. To show you that you don't belong where you think you do. And maybe you never did. Because now, when people say, "I'm going home," they check the doorknob first, listen for the creak, and whisper to themselves, "Please let it be the same this time." But it never is. Not anymore. It began the night everyone woke up gasping. No fire. No earthquake. No sirens in the distance. Just hundreds of people, jolting upright at the exact same moment, breath catching in their throats, sweat pouring from their brows like they'd just escaped drowning. Most thought it was a panic attack. Others blamed stress. But when the town's message board filled with posts the next day, all saying the same thing, did anyone else dream of the red door? No one could ignore it anymore. Every person in Elmridge had the same dream. A hallway stretched too far, with walls that pulsed like lungs, a smell like rotting violets, and at the end, a single red door, closed, silent. Bleeding light from the cracks like it couldn't hold what was inside. None of them opened it. None of them dared. But every dream ended the same way, with the sound of footsteps approaching behind them, faster than they could turn, and a whisper from the dark, "Wake up before it sees you." For days, no one could sleep. Coffee sold out. Pharmacies ran dry. People filled the church pews not for sermons, but for the sanctuary of shared terror. But eventually, sleep crept in again. Not with rest, with weight. Like the dreams had become heavier, more dense, and this time, the hallway was different. The door closer. The smell sharper. Some said they heard crying behind it. Others said laughter. One man claimed he touched the knob. He didn't wake up. He didn't die, either. His body still breathed, still twitched. But his eyes remained open, frozen in a look of such indescribable ecstasy and horror that his own wife screamed when she saw him. He stayed like that for a week. On the 7th day, he whispered just 2 words, "It's dreaming." That's when the sky began to change. Only slightly. But the stars shifted. The constellations didn't match. The moon began rising 2 minutes earlier each night. Animals grew restless. Dogs howled in unison at nothing. Birds circled the town without landing. People began forgetting small things. PIN numbers, relatives' birthdays, names of childhood pets, and replacing them with things that weren't theirs. Memories they insisted had always been true. One woman remembered raising twin boys. She only had one daughter. Another swore her house used to be painted blue. It had never been anything but gray. But the scariest part wasn't what they forgot. It was what they shared. Because the dreams kept coming, and they kept changing. no longer unique to each person. They were connected, layered, continued. One person would wake up mid-conversation only for their neighbor to finish the same sentence the next night. They were dreaming as a town. A single, collective sleep state where time bent and reality blurred. The line between what was real and what was remembered began to break apart like ice underfoot. Then came the maps, drawings, paintings, scratches on napkins. People began sketching the same layout in their sleep. A town that wasn't quite Elmridge, but almost. Buildings slightly taller, streets wider, trees twisted, and always at the center, a house without windows. Just a door, the red house. Only this time it wasn't in the dream. It was the dream, because the red house wasn't haunting Elmridge. Elmridge was inside it, and it was beginning to wake up. As it did, people began to merge. One girl walked into school and greeted her teacher in French. She didn't speak French. She wasn't even sure how she knew the words coming out of her mouth. But the teacher replied without thinking, because she did, somehow, understand. Later, the girl found a notebook in her bag filled with dates and drawings of places she'd never seen. When she asked her parents about it, they stared at her like she was someone else. They didn't recognize the handwriting, and neither did she. It was becoming impossible to tell who was real anymore, or if real still existed. There were rules now, strange ones, passed around in whispers. Don't fall asleep near mirrors. Never say your full name out loud in the dark. If you dream you're awake, check the sky. If the stars blink, close your eyes and don't open them until you feel cold. If you reach the red door, do not knock, no matter how much it begs. The begging was the worst part, because soon people began hearing the dreams while awake. Not voices, feelings, moments of grief that didn't belong to them. Sudden panic in the middle of a sentence. Laughter that left their throats sore like they'd been screaming, and in the silence that followed the door. Closer, always closer. And then, one night, the entire town dreamed together. All at once, the power grid went down at 11:03 p.m., phones died, clocks stopped. Every living person in Elmridge fell unconscious within 60 seconds. And for 8 hours, the town was silent. Not a bird, not a breeze. Just the sound of breathing. Deep, synchronized, shared. And when they awoke, everything was slightly off. Colors looked duller. Food had no taste. The air felt heavier, but no one could tell why. The town knew. They weren't fully awake. Not anymore. They had passed through the red door, together, and left a piece of themselves behind. Now, even the walls remembered. Wooden beams creaked out lullabies from forgotten mothers. Lampposts flickered to the rhythm of childhood jump rope songs. The wind carried the scent of fires that hadn't happened yet. People tried leaving, but every road led back, not in circles, in loops. You'd drive for an hour and find yourself arriving at your own house, only it wouldn't be your house, just one like it. Slightly off. Photos in the wrong frames. Drawers that opened to other people's letters. Rooms that had no doors until you walked away. You weren't supposed to leave. You weren't supposed to wake up. Because you weren't asleep anymore. You were remembering. And the red house was watching, from the center of this shared, stitched together mind. Its heartbeat pulsing beneath the ground of every street. You lived inside its memory now, and it was deciding which version of you it liked best. It began with whispers, just one or two at first, soft enough to be mistaken for wind or faulty wiring, a murmur under the floorboards. A voice tucked behind the faucet drip. Most people dismissed it, until they realized the whispers didn't stop when the power did. Didn't stop when the windows were shut, when the radios were turned off, when even the blood in your ears should have been the loudest sound left. And then they noticed something worse. The voices weren't random. They were theirs. The walls were repeating things back to people, exactly as they had said them, years ago. Not the kind of thing you confess in public. The kind of thing you mutter into your pillow. the sobs you think only your ceiling hears, the curses you say under your breath when no one is home, the cruel things you told yourself in the mirror after a bad night. It remembered all of it, and now it was echoing it back, word for word, tone for tone. You'd be brushing your teeth, and from the cold tile, you'd hear, "You're always going to be a failure," said in your voice, said how you said it, as if the house had never stopped listening. For some, it was a cruel reminder. For others, it was like meeting a version of themselves they'd hoped was long dead. And the more the town ignored it, the more confident the voices became. They started responding, not just repeating, responding, engaging. Like the walls had been practicing all these years and had finally learned how to talk back. It was Mrs. Delaney who first admitted it publicly, that her house didn't just whisper, it accused. That she heard herself arguing with someone she couldn't see, someone who used her own memories against her, who remembered every lie she ever told, every moment she wished she could forget, and repeated them back with surgical precision. She tried moving, didn't help. The voice followed her to the motel, because it wasn't the house. It was her. It had learned her. People realized the truth in pieces, that the walls weren't just listening. They were collecting, memorizing inflections, storing phrases, stitching together entire conversations from fragments of fear and guilt. And once the voice had enough, once it built a full version of you, it began speaking with confidence, clarity, cruelty. One man, Ron Haskins, tried testing it. He stood in his bathroom and said out loud, "I am not afraid of you." The walls didn't respond. He said it again. Still nothing. But that night, while brushing his teeth, he heard a new voice behind the mirror. Deeper, calm, and it said you should be. He smashed every reflective surface in his home that night. But even then, he heard his own voice humming through the cracks in the drywall, reciting old songs he didn't remember singing. Soon, people were sealing their vents, padding their rooms, sleeping outside, even in winter. Anything to avoid being alone in a place that remembered too much. But it didn't help. The voices didn't need walls anymore. They had already rooted themselves in the fabric of the town, the ground, the trees, the air itself. You'd walk past a lamppost and hear "She never loved you." Pass a classroom and catch "They know what you did." Hold your child's hand and flinch when a breeze carries. You weren't meant to be a parent. And it got worse. Because the voices weren't just content with memory, they started asking questions. Why didn't you stop it? What did it cost you to be right? Do you think they'd still love you if they knew? They weren't rhetorical. If you didn't answer, the house did. It would guess, and it would guess right. One teenager, frustrated and exhausted, screamed, "Fine! I wanted her to die!" The next morning, the name of his sister was scrawled across every wall in his house. Hundreds of times, burned into the plaster, and in his handwriting. He hadn't touched a pen in days. The red house had learned the shape of shame. It knew how to replicate you. Not physically, emotionally. It could impersonate the rhythm of yourself, loathing perfectly. And once it could speak in your guilt, it could become you. People began saying that their houses were dreaming. That furniture rearranged itself overnight. That family photos had changed, subtly, cruelly. A missing tooth in a child that never lost it. A bruise on a neck that no one remembered. A smile just a little too wide, too empty. And then the voices started predicting. He's going to leave you. You'll find her dead in the tub. You only have 3 nights left. And the terrifying part, they were right. Because the red house wasn't just learning from you. It was guiding you. Pushing you toward the outcomes that matched the voice. Conditioning you, bit by bit, to become the version of yourself it whispered about. Making the lie feel more comfortable than the truth. Until you accepted it, embraced it, reenacted it. And once you did, the voice stopped being a voice. It became your thoughts. There was no more whispering from the walls. because now it was coming from inside you, seamless, silent, and impossible to separate from your own. You'd tell yourself, "I'm fine." But the echo underneath would mutter, "You're rotting." You'd smile at your child and hear, you never wanted him. You'd kiss your partner and taste the regret that had been growing since the day you lied to their face and told them you were over it. The red house had never needed doors to get in. It just needed you to talk. And now that it knew your voice, it could wear it like a mask. And you'd never know which version of you was speaking next. They always say a name holds power, but no one in Elmridge understood just how much until names began whispering themselves through the cracks of silence. First during sleep, then while people were awake alone, quiet, breathing too softly in empty rooms. It wasn't dramatic, not screaming, not wailing, just a soft voice, calm, familiar yours, repeating a name you hadn't said in years, a name you thought you'd forgotten, or worse, buried. At first, people thought it was memory playing tricks. Old flames, childhood friends, bullies, abusers, names that carried too much weight, too much noise. But then it started getting stranger. Names they had no reason to know. Names they'd never heard aloud, but still recognized with the same sick certainty as if it had always belonged to them. People would whisper them without meaning to, as if the name forced its way between the teeth. A man alone in his garage, tightening a bolt, softly muttering Callum. A girl singing a nursery rhyme that suddenly ended with the name Theresa, though no one in her family had ever known one. They started writing them down. Lists filled notebooks, dozens of names, scratched and re-scratched in worsening handwriting. Some were repeated by many, some only once. And when they tried to search for the people behind those names, that's when the pattern began. The names were of the forgotten, people who had once lived in Elmridge, but had no graves, no birth records, no photos, no legacy. It was like they'd been cut out of history, trimmed from every memory, leaving behind only a name, and the echo of a life too terrible to hold on to. The Red House had kept them, and now it was releasing them, piece by piece, syllable by syllable. One morning, every blackboard in the school spelled Margaret Hallow in chalk. No teacher wrote it, no student admitted to it. The chalk was dry, the name was wet. Another day, mailboxes across 3 neighborhoods were jammed with envelopes containing nothing but the name Jonathan Cask. No sender, no message, just the name, typed again and again in different fonts, as if someone had been trying to remember how it looked on a tombstone that never existed. Then came the ones who answered, because some names didn't just linger in the air. Some summoned. There was a boy named Theo who said Miranda Vale 3 times during a dare. He said the name with mockery, laughing each time, until the third, when he stopped laughing. His mouth froze, his pupils shrank, and then he whispered something so quiet none of the other kids heard it. When they asked what it was, he said, "She told me I'm where she left off." That night, he carved the name Miranda into the wall above his bed and disappeared. The bed was unmade, the pillows still warm, but the door was locked from the inside. They never found him. More names appeared after that, on bathroom mirrors, inside cereal boxes, on the pages of books that had no business containing them. The town tried to ban the uttering of these names. Church leaders held prayer circles. The mayor forbade the publication of any name deemed unverifiable. But it didn't help, because the names didn't need to be spoken to be heard. A woman received a call on her landline. The only sound on the other end was her own voice saying, "Don't forget about Lena." She'd never met a Lana in her life, but from that moment on, she began losing every other name she ever knew. Her husband, her children, her own. Only Lena remained, written in lipstick on her mirror the night she vanished, her house undisturbed except for one disturbing detail. Every photo in the house had the faces scratched out, except for one. A girl with a ribbon in her hair and no eyes. Some names returned with faces. People began seeing strangers on their street who shouldn't exist. Children playing hopscotch outside abandoned houses. Men smoking on porches that hadn't been built in 30 years. A woman in a red coat, walking a dog no one else could see, always murmuring, "He doesn't remember. He never remembers." And these ghosts, or echoes, or incomplete people, they didn't want to hurt you. They wanted you to remember them. Because the red house had been erasing. Not killing. Not destroying. Unmaking. It had been slowly unspooling the threads of people's existence, making them vanish from history. Not with violence, but with forgetting. And now the forgotten were speaking back, trying to force themselves into the minds of anyone soft enough, weak enough, guilty enough. They were looking for hosts, not to possess, to continue. The horror wasn't that you might speak a name. It was that the name might fit. A boy named Max spoke the name Elias Crane one night while brushing his teeth. He claimed it just slipped out. But by morning, he stopped responding to Max. He corrected his parents when they used it. He signed his homework as Elias. He didn't remember ever being anyone else. And when they showed him pictures of himself as Max, he laughed and said, "You got the wrong boy." They moved him to another town. But every night, he still whispered he needed a name, so I let him borrow mine. The names now wait in the quiet, lurking behind the pause in a sentence. The hesitation before you speak. You'll feel it, a pressure, a heat, like your tongue doesn't belong to you for a moment. And then, if you're unlucky, you'll say it. And once you say it, it grows inside you. Not a memory, a replacement. And you'll wonder how many people in town have already spoken theirs. How many are walking around wearing borrowed lives? How many still have time to resist? But the worst part, the red house has more names. So many more. Enough to fill every mouth in Elmridge, and maybe even yours. It showed up on a Tuesday. No grand entrance. No thunderclap or omen. Just a grandfather clock standing at the center of Main Street, rooted into the cobblestone like it had always been there. No wires, no hinges, no fingerprints. At first, people thought it was a prank, an art installation, maybe even a town-funded mystery meant to stir some attention. But by sundown, they knew something was wrong, because the clock ticked, loudly, relentlessly, and backward. Its hands moved in perfect reverse, every tick subtracting time, every talk peeling away from the moment just past. But what truly unnerved the townspeople wasn't that it ticked backward. It was that they felt it. People reported dizziness, shortness of breath, a vague, creeping sense of déjà vu, like their memories were being siphoned off into the gears. You'd step near the clock and forget why you walked there in the first place. Conversations cut short. Thoughts unraveled mid-sentence. Someone would mention a friend, then blink and wonder if that friend had ever existed at all. The mayor ordered it removed. Workers brought chainsaws, welding torches, even a crane. Nothing worked. The metal-bent tools, repelled contact, hummed when touched. It didn't hurt anyone. It simply rejected any attempt to be moved. And the worst part, the time on the clock didn't match any existing time zone. It didn't count in hours or minutes. The digits looped in sequences no one recognized, and as the week wore on, those digits began to match events. A woman slipped and fell on the sidewalk at 13:02:77. Exactly 5 hours later, same timestamp, reversed, she disappeared from her hospital bed. A car accident happened at 09:44:12. 12 minutes after that, at 21:44:09 in mirror sequence, the same vehicle was found parked neatly on a lawn. Engine still warm, no one inside. The clock wasn't tracking time. It was tracking fate. And worse, it was undoing it. People began watching it obsessively, logging every shift, every mirrored pair. Forums were flooded with theories. It was a countdown. It was a resurrection tool. It was the town's collective conscience bleeding out through brass and shadow. But no matter what people guessed, one truth burned beneath all speculation. The Red House had a schedule, and the clock was keeping it. Then came the bleeding hour. It happened at Hundru. For 1 full minute, everyone in town, whether sleeping, waking, eating, hiding, felt something wet drip from their nose. Not blood, not sweat, but something old. A thick, tar-like liquid that left no stain but smelled like burnt sugar and bones. Those who wiped it away were safe. Those who ignored it, who dared to taste it, were changed. One man licked his upper lip and collapsed screaming. When they revived him, he could only say one sentence. It's already happened. He said it 247 times before he finally stopped breathing. That was the first death tied to the clock. It wasn't the last. Days passed, and the clock began to affect the landscape. Trees near it wilted backward, leaves climbing up into branches, seeds burying themselves from soil. Sidewalk cracks reversed themselves. Dead flies twitched and flew away. But it wasn't life being restored. It was moments being reversed, and only within a certain radius. Like the clock was testing its reach. One night, a couple argued near it, screamed. Threats, slaps, the kind of fight that ends marriages. But at exactly 17:17:17, everything stopped. They froze, turned, hugged, kissed, smiled, and repeated their conversation backward, not just the words. The emotion. Rewinding the entire breakdown like it had never happened. A neighbor recorded it on their phone, but the footage was blank. Just static and that ticking sound, growing louder until the screen cracked. And still, no one could destroy the clock. It grew bolder. Began counting in 3 hands instead of 2. Added symbols no one could translate, though some believed they looked like letters. Twisted runes made from bones. Then, someone noticed the most terrifying thing of all. The clock's top plaque, engraved in antique silver, now bore a phrase, "You've already paid." Paid for what? No one knew, until they remembered. Because that's what the clock was really doing, restoring memory. Not in full, not directly, but in fragments. People began dreaming of moments they swore never happened, until they walked past the clock again and found a photo of themselves holding hands with a stranger they'd never met, standing in front of the red house. Some people dreamt of funerals, weddings, murders, all missing from their actual lives. But real, so real. A boy remembered drowning at age 5. But he was 13 now, alive and well. After seeing the clock, he described the water, the feeling of lungs collapsing, a voice whispering, "It's not your time." His mother confirmed he had fallen into the lake, but she'd pulled him out. There had never been any death, no resuscitation. Except, what if she hadn't? What if something had reversed it? What if the clock had already been there, long before they noticed? And now it was waking up. One woman placed her hand on the wood frame at exactly 11:11:11. She vanished. Not exploded, not dissolved, just blinked out of existence. But days later, her twin sister opened an old family photo album and found her in pictures where she hadn't been before. Smiling, holding a child that didn't exist, wearing clothes no one had ever seen. The clock hadn't killed her. It had relocated her to another version of Elmridge, a version where she did belong. People began standing before the clock, desperate, begging for second chances, asking it to rewind moments they regretted. Some said it worked. A broken arm healed overnight, a miscarriage reversed, a missed chance resurrected. But those gains came with prices, paid not by the asker, but by someone else. A neighbor lost her speech. A teenager went blind. A child vanished from her crib. Balance, that was the clock's law. Take from one, give to another, return what was owed. Even if no one asked to borrow it in the first place. And now, the ticks are getting faster. Whatever the clock is counting toward, it's approaching. Something is coming. Backward, forward, sideways. And the final second won't be the end. It'll be the beginning. The one we missed. The one the red house has been preparing for all along. There was something wrong with the doors in Elmridge. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It began slowly, like rot in a wooden frame, quiet, spreading. First, it was the creak. Not the usual tired groan of hinges, but a sound that felt intentional, like the door had something to say every time it moved. Then came the draft, even in summer. A wind that wasn't cold or hot, just present. People chalked it up to old houses, poor insulation, weird weather. But denial only works until your bedroom door opens itself in the middle of the night, and you hear someone breathe on the other side, but no one's there. The doors no longer obeyed the people who lived behind them. They stopped locking. They opened when they wanted, stayed closed when forced. One man swore he watched his front door unlock, unhinge, and step aside like it had become aware of something just outside. The next morning he found muddy footprints on his carpet, leading in, but not leading out. His daughter was missing. Her shoes remained by her bed. The door never explained itself. It simply waited. People began noticing that the doors didn't just open. They led to places they weren't supposed to. A garage that should have connected to the backyard instead opened into an unfamiliar hallway, lit with red bulbs and lined with mirrors that didn't reflect your body quite right. A closet door, once storage for linens, now revealed a staircase descending far deeper than any foundation should allow. And sometimes you could hear footsteps on that staircase. Coming up, others tried boarding up their homes, hammering planks over every entrance, but the wood would rot overnight. The nails would twist and fall loose. One woman painted every door shut with red wax. She thought she'd won, until she woke to find a new door etched into her bedroom wall. Not built, etched. Carved into plaster and stone. The edges blackened, pulsing slightly. She refused to open it. She made it 2 days. On the third, it opened on its own. She didn't scream. She just walked in, like she'd been expected. Then came the rooms with too many doors. Children started drawing pictures of their homes that didn't make sense. A playroom with 6 doors when there should have been 2. A kitchen with a rotating wall that sometimes revealed a stairwell to nowhere. One child told her teacher, "There's a door in my closet that cries when I don't open it." The teacher laughed until she visited the house and found the closet moist, like it had wept through the drywall. People began whispering theories that each door was a decision, a memory, a lie you told and never owned up to. That opening the wrong one meant facing something you'd buried. A man opened a bathroom cabinet and found his childhood bedroom behind it, exactly as it was the night his brother disappeared. A teenager opened the supply closet at school and found herself looking at her own kitchen, except everything was slightly off. Her mother wore a wedding ring she never owned. Her dog was missing. Her own photo on the fridge had different handwriting on the back. She closed the door. When she reopened it, it was just brooms and bleach again. One by one, the townspeople began to choose not to open any doors at all. They entered and exited through windows, crawled in and out. But the doors did not like being ignored. They slammed themselves, whispered names through the cracks, reeked of flowers, funeral flowers, and they began to appear in dreams. Endless corridors filled with doors of all colors, sizes, styles. Oak, iron, glass, velvet, bone. Each door pulsed with some memory, some moment you were ashamed of, and the red house whispered behind each one. All your paths lead here. The most terrifying thing. Some doors weren't meant for people at all. They were meant for things that had been locked away long ago, things that remembered you, things that had waited. One woman, sleep, deprived and shaking, admitted she had opened a door that led into a mirror version of her house. Same layout, same furniture, but all the pictures had their faces scratched out and every light bulb hummed like a heartbeat. She tried to leave, but the door was gone. When she finally came back, no one recognized her. Her ID didn't scan. Her fingerprints didn't match. Her husband swore she looked 10 years older. She begged, pleaded, cried, but in the end, she was taken away, screaming one name over and over, "That wasn't my door!" The red house had been building toward this. preparing the town, house by house, for a choice it hadn't explained yet. A choice you wouldn't understand until it was too late. Because now every door is a gamble. Every knob you turn might open a memory you can't escape. A version of yourself you abandoned. A consequence long overdue. And there are more doors than ever. Some aren't even in your house. Some follow you to work, appear behind trees, flicker into existence between blinks. A stall door in a public bathroom that reads your secrets in your handwriting. A freezer door that opens into a version of your kitchen, but the food is moldy and someone is eating at the table. A front door you swear you locked, but now it's open just an inch. Waiting. Always waiting. People have stopped opening them. But eventually we all have to. Because there's one door left. We all see it now. Same color. Same handle. No matter who we are or where we live. We all dream of it now. A final door. Red. Breathing. And it will not stay closed forever. It wasn't just the doors anymore. Now there were rooms. Entire spaces blooming into existence where no blueprint had ever drawn them. People would come home from the grocery store to find a new hallway branching off their den. A guest bedroom that never existed before, complete with a bed that looked used, sheets wrinkled like someone had just stood up. They'd call their spouses in panic, ask how a whole new room appeared overnight, only for their partners to reply, "It's always been there. You don't remember." That's what made it worse. It wasn't just that the rooms appeared. It's that they were remembered differently. You might walk into your laundry room and find the washer and dryer gone, replaced by a table set for a meal you never ate, the plates filled with food that looked days old. Or open a linen closet and discover it goes back 15 feet, lined with shelves of your childhood toys, preserved in dust and silence. The real horror, however, wasn't what the rooms showed. It was what they held on to, because once you entered one, it became harder to leave. Time stuttered inside them. You'd step in for 5 minutes, and your neighbor would insist you were gone for 3 hours. Worse, you'd come out feeling wrong, like your bones were tighter in your skin, like your voice echoed slightly before it left your mouth. People began to report minor physical changes. Birthmarks vanishing, scars shifting location. A left-handed man now writing perfectly with his right. One girl had a mole on her cheek that wasn't there before. She said it had always been there. Her mother swore it hadn't. The rooms adapted. They watched. And when they liked you, they rearranged you. Soon, people began finding themselves in rooms they didn't remember walking into. You'd close your eyes in bed and open them in a damp space with walls that pulsed like lungs, no light source except the slow, red glow leaking from cracks in the ceiling. A woman claimed she walked through her kitchen and ended up in a theater, rows of empty chairs facing a screen that played home videos she had never taken. But she was in all of them, standing behind the camera, watching her own family with hollow eyes. Another man described a room made entirely of static, not just white noise, visual static, moving, flickering. He could feel the floor, hear the buzz, but everything looked like a broken channel, and in the middle of it stood his dead brother, mouthing something over and over, "We live in the edits." People started to wonder if these rooms weren't being added, but returned. As if the houses had always held them, hidden just out of reach, until the red house allowed them back in. And then there were the returners. That's what the town started calling them. People who disappeared into these impossible rooms for days, weeks, and came back. But not entirely. They were different. Their eyes blinked out of rhythm. They laughed at things no one else said. They remembered moments that hadn't happened yet. One man stood at the edge of his driveway for 13 hours, whispering, "It's Thursday, but the sun's still holding Tuesday." Another returner only spoke in past tense, even about things she was currently doing. When asked where she'd been, she simply said, "I was the room. It let me go because it got full." A handful of returners drew the same symbol over and over. A circle with a door in the middle, and inside the door, a single eye. No one knew what it meant. But one of them, a child barely old enough to write, said that's the Watcher's pupil. It looks through us to find the others. The others. That was the question that froze the entire town. Because that meant there were more. More rooms. More Watchers. More versions of Elmridge stacked like glass panes over each other, each with their own red house, each bleeding into the next one through cracks the rooms were opening. People began ripping open drywall, trying to find these spaces. Desperation gripped the town. They drilled into their basements, tore through attics. Some did find something. Narrow corridors with red wallpaper that flaked like skin, closets filled with teeth wrapped in lace. A single room where a phone rang constantly, but never connected. And each one came with a decision: do you walk away? Or do you listen? Some didn't make it out. A woman screamed through her baby monitor in the middle of the night. Her husband rushed in, found the baby sleeping soundly. No sign of his wife. The closet door slightly ajar. Her voice was still coming from the monitor, crying, "Don't let the room close. I'm not all the way out yet." It closed anyway. She was never seen again. The rooms had rules, but no one knew them. Not until it was too late. All they knew was this: if you see a new door and it wasn't there yesterday, do not go through it. If you hear a voice inside a room that should be silent, do not speak back. If the light inside a room never reaches the corners, it isn't your house anymore. And if you return from a room and people look at you strangely, check your reflection. Because sometimes the room keeps you and sends something back in your shape. A borrowed skin, a placeholder. And it smiles just a little too wide when someone calls your name. By the time the mirrors started reacting, people had already begun second-guessing their senses. The doors that wandered, the rooms that rearranged reality, the names that breathed themselves through your lips. Elmridge had stopped trying to explain anything. But the mirrors were different, because the mirrors didn't wait to be looked into. They looked first. It started small, just a glance, a flicker, like something moved in the glass just before your eyes found it. You'd chalk it up to sleep, to nerves, to shadows. Until it happened again, and again, until the reflection turned its head a split second too late, or its smile lingered a moment too long. You'd be combing your hair and suddenly stop, realizing your hand was no longer in sync with the one in the glass. It was like something inside the mirror was trying to keep up and slowly falling behind. A man named Carl was the first to speak out publicly. He stood at the town's weekly meeting and trembled his way through the story of how his own reflection didn't follow him out of frame. "I stepped away," he said, "but I looked back, and it was still standing there. Just staring, like it was waiting." They found Carl 2 days later in his garage, every mirror in his house smashed, except for one, hidden behind a sheet in the attic. It had no reflection at all, not even the room around it, just black, and etched in the bottom corner, in what looked like cracked fingernail scratches, was the phrase, "Lu lokato slobobo." After that, it spread like a sickness. People covered mirrors, avoided their own reflections in windows and ponds. Those who had to use them, makeup artists, barbers, tailors, started taping paper over the top half, refusing to meet their own eyes. And it wasn't just about movement anymore. The reflections had begun to change. A woman claimed the mirror version of her had a scar she didn't. A teenager's reflection had different clothes. One boy swore his reflection blinked vertically like a lizard. And a nurse, poor Emily, locked herself in the hospital restroom after she saw her mirrored self grin while she was crying. When they finally pried the door open, she was sitting on the counter, whispering, "It told me I'm the reflection. That I've been the reflection this whole time." The red house had always played with memory, with guilt, with shame. But the mirrors were different. The mirrors were testing identity, trying to see what parts of a person could be swapped without anyone noticing. One man watched in real time as his reflection took a step back and didn't follow him. Just stood there, lips moving. No sound. When he mouthed, "What do you want?" The mirror version smiled and answered, "A turn." And then it began to spread beyond mirrors. Reflections in puddles started glitching. People looking down only to see the sky behind them, or someone else's face. A lake on the outskirts of town became black as oil overnight. People dared each other to look in it. Those who did came back quiet, changed. One boy stared into it for hours, and when pulled away, he only said, "I saw every version of me that died in rooms I never entered." Another woman looked for 5 seconds and screamed until her throat tore. People tried removing all reflective surfaces from their homes, but the town itself began to reflect. Windows shimmered even without light. Doorknobs showed glimpses of eyes. Even soup spoons twisted faces into warped smiles. And the red house, it began showing people to themselves. Not the selves they knew, but the ones they hid. You'd look into a mirror and see yourself 5 years older, hair missing, eyes hollow, carrying the weight of a decision you hadn't made yet. Or worse, yourself as a child, staring back with a face full of fear, as if you were the monster at the door. The mirrors weren't just copying anymore. They were revealing, pulling out every version of you that had ever existed, or might still exist, and placing them side by side until the line between real and reflection blurred into nothing. And then, for some, the mirrors began to speak, not with mouths, not with words, with feelings. You'd look into one and feel rage that wasn't yours, or guilt so heavy your knees would buckle, or a strange, consuming hunger for something you didn't even have a name for. One man stood in front of his bathroom mirror and began to sob uncontrollably. When his wife asked why, he said, "I miss my daughter, but they'd never had a child." And that night, a little girl's voice called to him from the mirror, "I remember you, Daddy." He broke the glass to try and reach her. He didn't survive the blood loss. But even with the mirror shattered, his daughter's voice kept whispering through the shards for days. And then came the switch. It wasn't often. Not yet. But it happened. People began changing. Not just in attitude, in detail. A man's eye color shifted overnight. A woman who had been left-handed woke up writing effortlessly with her right. But it wasn't just physical. It was behavioral. A quiet, kind teenager named Lucy became violent overnight. Not in outbursts, in calculation. When questioned, she simply said, "I wasn't the one who came back." The others in town started marking mirrors, drawing crosses in lipstick, stringing salt across the top, carving symbols into the frames. Superstition ran wild. Some believed you had to blink before the reflection did. Others said you must never look at yourself under moonlight. But none of it truly worked, because the red house didn't need rules. It needed attention. And mirrors were its mouthpieces now. Every reflection in town is suspect. Every shiny surface, a potential leak in reality. People don't ask, "Is that me?" anymore. They ask, "If it's not me, why is it smiling?" Because sometimes, in the reflection, you're not alone. Sometimes, another figure stands just behind you, closer every night, and one day, you'll blink, and the mirror won't blink back. There was an old grove behind the outskirts of Elmridge, where the trees grew too tightly and the light barely touched the ground. It had no name. People just called it the wood, like something out of a half-forgotten fairy tale. No trails, no signs. Just trees, thick and black, older than the town, older than memory. And for most of Elmridge's history, no one dared go too deep. The edge was fine. Kids played there. Teenagers smoked under the cover of branches. But everyone knew the rule passed down in stories and shivers. Don't go past the 6th tree. They said the woods were listening. That if you stayed quiet long enough, you'd hear it. A voice so low you'd feel it in your ribs before you ever heard it in your ears. A whisper. Not in English, not in any language you could name. But still, you'd understand it, because it wasn't speaking to you. It was remembering you. It started again when the leaves stopped falling. That fall, the trees in the woods stayed full, green, lush. Even as the rest of the town dropped into the season like clockwork, the grove stood untouched by time. And people noticed. A woman walked her dog past the sixth tree and vanished. Her leash was found tied in a perfect bow, the kind she never used. A hiker took a wrong turn and called 911 from inside the woods. The dispatcher recorded the call. His voice was panicked at first, then confused, then hushed, then gone. The line stayed open for 6 hours, filled with only the soft, rhythmic sound of something breathing. People claimed the trees whispered their names. Not loud, not threatening, just soft, insistent, calling them like an old friend. One boy wandered in and swore he saw his dead grandmother sitting on a tree stump, smiling, saying, "Come see what I've built." He never went back to school after that. Couldn't be around people. Said their voices weren't right anymore. And then the trees started showing up elsewhere. Not just outside. Inside homes. Black bark growing out of walls. Roots pushing through tile. One family woke to find a branch reaching through their bathroom mirror, dripping black sap that smelled like burnt sugar and old breath. A man opened his closet and found a spiral staircase made of twisting wood and damp moss. He walked 3 steps before he screamed. He never said what he saw, just stared at his hands for days, whispering, "I'm already planted." The wood was spreading, not just physically, but mentally. People began dreaming of it, night after night, the same forest, the same path, always 6 trees in, always a moment when the trees would begin to move, not walk, not sway, rearrange. Closing in behind you, shifting the path, not trapping you, guiding you. Like the forest had a route in mind, and you weren't the one walking it. You were being walked, and then came the messages carved into bark. At first, they were names, people no one remembered. Then phrases, "Yo you sadavi eonce, tichi roats rumiember, jar oyn b sequardias style gurawayanj." But the worst came when a girl brought her phone into the grove and recorded the whispers. She played them back in reverse and heard her own voice, screaming for help. She hadn't spoken during the recording, hadn't made a sound, but the audio was clear, her exact tone, her exact voice. And then something else spoke, right after she wasn't ready. Then the trees began answering questions. It started with a boy who whispered his brother's name into a hollow trunk. The tree leaked sap shaped like his brother's handwriting. Writing that simply said, "It wasn't your fault." A woman who miscarried whispered into the roots. The leaves rustled, and her stomach twitched. She woke the next morning with her period reversed, time rewinding in her own body. It didn't last. By the end of the week, her reflection had changed, showing her holding a baby with no face. People began to believe the wood was offering answers, or maybe confessions. A place where secrets were stored, not told, traded. A man whispered, "What happened to my father?" And 3 hours later, his father's voice called him on the phone. Dead 15 years, the voice slow, creaking, asking, "Why did you let me burn?" That man walked into the woods 2 nights later and never returned. The red house had always been about memory, regret, things forgotten, things buried. But the wood remembered everything, not in words, in roots, in the bark of the 6th tree, where the first letter of every person's name eventually carved itself in if they got too close. And when the bark filled, it cracked open, and someone, stepped out. A woman made of bark and moss was seen wandering the fields behind the town hall. Her eyes glowed green. Her teeth were flat like chewed-up nails. She wept sap, and when they approached her, she said, "I forgot who I was," but the trees remembered. Then she fell apart, not in death, in disassembly, back into leaves, back into soil, and from that soil the roots reached deeper, finding new homes beneath the town, new whispers, new listeners, because now, even when you're inside, far from the trees, you still hear it. Late at night, soft, beneath the floorboards, like something old, something tired, something buried deep is remembering you again. And it wants you to remember it too. The red house never wanted to be seen. But the wood has always watched. And now it's calling your name in your own voice, from just beneath the bed. It happened on a Wednesday. Quiet, undramatic, just a sunrise like any other, except the red house was gone. People noticed quickly. Its silhouette had been part of Elmridge's horizon, for as long as anyone could remember. Lurking just on the edge of the forest, framed in decay and whispers. But when morning light hit the town, that crooked rooftop, that sagging porch, those windows that watched without blinking, they weren't there. The clearing it once occupied was still grassless, dry, and gray, but the house itself had vanished. Not burned, not collapsed. Gone. Some celebrated, others locked their doors tighter than ever. But no one dared step into the space it left behind, not at first. Then, one by one, it started coming back, not all at once, not whole, piece by piece. A red shingle on the roof of a bakery, even though the owner swore he'd only used black. A door handle shaped like a curled finger on the hardware store, cold even under summer sun. A window in the library, fogged from the inside, through which people swore they could see themselves sitting in chairs that didn't exist. It was like the house had been cut apart and spread across the town, as if it no longer needed to stay in one place. And the people changed too. It began with small things. A family discovered a locked door in their hallway that none of them remembered. They broke it open and found a staircase that spiraled down. The first step was dry wood, the second damp. By the seventh, it was red, not painted, soaked. They never made it to the eighth. In another home, a woman opened her fridge to find a plate of food she never cooked: roast beef, undercooked potatoes, a slice of cake topped with a candle burning down to nothing. The next morning, her calendar had changed. It said her birthday was today. It wasn't. She knew it wasn't. But everyone she met told her, "Happy birthday," their eyes wide and fixed. The red house was settling in. You'd walk down Main Street and see curtains drawn where they'd never been before. Pass by a shop window and see your reflection smiling, even if your face was blank. One man saw a version of himself in the post office mirror, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, sorting letters addressed to people who had died decades ago. When he blinked, the mirror was empty. When he got home, his mailbox was filled with envelopes written in his own handwriting, none of which he remembered writing. It wasn't just the town changing. It was repeating. You'd meet someone twice in the same hour, wearing the same clothes, saying the same sentence. A child called his mother by a different name and insisted that's what he'd always called her. Two teenagers claimed to have identical dreams, standing in a hallway made entirely of mirrors, doors, and trees, and being told, "This is what happens when the house remembers you." And the red house remembered everyone now. Not just the guilty, not just the cursed. Everyone. Every lie, every secret, every stolen glance, every forgotten regret, it built itself into them. Into their porches, into their closets, into their minds. A man entered his attic to find a room perfectly mimicking the red house's second floor, even though he'd never been inside. He knew it by instinct, knew where the walls would creak, where the light never touched, where the portrait would hang. And there it was, a painting of himself, smiling, framed in splinters and teeth. Others heard footsteps in their basements when no one was home. The sound of chairs scraping across the floor in locked rooms. One woman claimed the wind in her kitchen hummed a lullaby her mother used to sing, except her mother had gone missing inside the real red house 30 years ago. And then, without warning, people began to disappear again. Not violently, not loudly, just unexplained absences. You'd walk into the bakery and the girl behind the counter would be gone. Vanished between two orders. A man walking his dog would vanish between one streetlight and the next. A child's blanket would still be warm, the toy still chirping from a recent touch, but the child gone. And in every case, the home they lived in would show signs. Peeling wallpaper revealing red boards underneath. Floors that creaked in iambic rhythm. Photographs reshuffled to include someone no one remembered taking the picture. People began painting over their walls in black. Blocking mirrors. Refusing to sleep in their bedrooms. But it didn't matter. The red house was no longer a building. It was a pattern. It was in the grain of the wood. The whispers in the vents, the dreams beneath the floorboards. And in every case, just before someone disappeared, they were seen staring at something, an object out of place, a door where none should be, a photo that had changed, just enough to make the skin crawl. A woman looked at an old lamp in her living room and froze. "That wasn't ours," she said. Her husband disagreed. She turned the lamp over and found a phrase carved into the base, "She's not your wife anymore." The husband vanished that night. The wife didn't cry. She just smiled. The next day, she ran the town's coffee shop like nothing had happened, though her eyes no longer blinked evenly. And still, the red house spread. People started whispering that it had always been here, that Elmridge was the house, that the streets were its veins, the rooms just waiting for the locks to click shut, that the forest was its memory and the mirrors were its eyes, that every person was just a page it had bookmarked, ready to reread, because it wasn't just remembering the town, it was rewriting it. New names appeared on mailboxes. Businesses changed overnight. One woman swore the local museum used to be a bookstore. Another man remembered of a bar that no one else had heard of, but it was on an old town map, buried beneath dust, listed as the Candle and Knife. People began keeping journals, desperate to remember what had been lost, what had changed. But the ink would fade. The pages would tear themselves out. The house didn't want competition. Only memory it controlled was safe. And soon, people understood the worst truth yet. The red house hadn't moved. They had. Every home, every block, every tree, they'd all shifted one step closer to it. Not the building, the idea. They had all been absorbed. Each person now lived in a different wing of the same impossible place. They were no longer neighbors. They were rooms. And somewhere in the core of it all, the true red house waited. Beating, breathing, alive. And soon it would wake up fully. Then the doors would lock, the walls would sigh, and every light would turn red. Forever. They said the red house had no heart, but that wasn't true. It did. They just didn't know where it was. Not until the light appeared, glowing from inside the town's oldest building, the one no one remembered building, a light that didn't flicker, didn't dim, didn't blink, just a dull, steady red glow, bleeding through every window like a wound that had never scabbed. It started on a Thursday night. 1 second, darkness. The next, that awful hum of color, the kind that lived behind your eyelids, pulsing like a migraine even when you closed your eyes. And the town changed, again. The light was always on. It poured into every home, into every alley, reflecting in puddles and mirrors, and even the backs of your own eyes. People taped blankets over windows, lined door frames with black tape, dug through attics for old blackout curtains. But the glow still crept in. It didn't shine like a lamp. It soaked like dye in water. Like it wasn't shining from the building at all, but from underneath the town, coming up through the cracks. And no matter where you stood in Elmridge, the light was always visible, even with your back turned. Even underground. Close your eyes, and it painted itself on the backs of your eyelids. Look away, and you could still see its outline burned into your vision, like you'd stared too long at the sun. It was as if the town had been re-centered. The red house was no longer on the edge, it was the core. And everything else had been built around it, whether anyone remembered or not. People began to speak slower, as if the light dragged their words down. Others couldn't sleep, not from fear, but because the light made it feel like it was always dusk. That in between hour when shadows are longest and nothing feels fully alive or fully dead. Children began drawing suns with red halos. A woman's pet bird died and came back the next morning, not alive, exactly, but sitting upright, eyes glowing red, whispering her ex-husband's name in a rasp it never had before. No one could explain it. And worse, no one seemed particularly surprised anymore. That was the most terrifying change. Not the red light, not the time slips, or the vanishing doors, or the echoes in the walls. It was the acceptance. The way the town folded into the madness like it was routine. A man would be found frozen in place mid-step, glassy-eyed, a grin carved into his face, and the police would arrive, not in a panic, but in silence. Wrap him in a blanket, speak softly and wait. He's just adjusting, they'd say. He'll melt back soon. People weren't shocked anymore when someone vanished into their basement or climbed into a mirror. It was all part of the house now. The town council, what was left of it, announced they would be holding a reunion. No explanation, no invitation. Just flyers posted on every door in that same red ink, which never dried and always bled through your fingers if you touched it. The flyer said only one thing, THELGHT nevier want OTBKG yozia u nevier lokatosi balai. On the night of the reunion, the town gathered, some voluntarily, some not. They were pulled gently like leaves to a drain. Every street lamp blinked out, every candle in every window died. Except for that one red light, brighter than ever now, pulsing like it had finally started to beat. The people gathered outside the old building, silent, heads tilted like listeners waiting for a secret. No one knew what they were waiting for. And then it opened. The door to the building cracked inward, and red spilled out like liquid, not blood, not flame, something else, memory, maybe. Regret made physical. People stepped forward, slowly, calmly, not afraid, not anymore. They'd seen too much. Been changed too many times. A man whispered as he walked inside, "She's waiting for me." A girl held her mother's hand and said, "This is the room I dreamt of." Those who didn't go inside tried to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The light had spread to every corner of Elmridge, every building, every mirror, every person. A woman tried to drive out of town, only to find the road had twisted in on itself, an impossible spiral that led her back to her own house. A house, now taller, redder, watching. She screamed. No one heard. Or maybe no one cared. Because the truth was laid bare, the town was the house now. There was no boundary, no door to close, no roof to escape. It had spread through every person who remembered, who dreamed, who feared, who looked. And now, the light was no longer something you saw. It was something you were. The survivors, if they could be called that, spoke of the final moment differently. Some saw the walls ripple outward like skin. Others described a noise, deep and slow, like a piano falling into the ocean. A few said nothing, just stared. But they all agreed on one thing: time stopped. Not in a dramatic, clock-shattering way. Just stopped. Like it had been unnecessary all along. There were no goodbyes, no last-minute escapes, just a town folding into a shape it was always meant to be. And at the center, the light remained steady, calm, hungry. They say, if you drive far enough, down roads that no longer appear on any map, you'll reach a town that shouldn't exist. With no name, no history, but all the houses there have red shingles. All the doors have brass handles, cool to the touch, and at night the light never goes out. And if you dare to knock, if you dare to step inside, make sure you remember who you are. Because the house will remember too. And it doesn't take kindly to strangers who forget themselves.